So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto x SAMUI x ANKO x XTEMARI Harem. This is second part of the series, so let's start the series. Are you sure about this, B? A asked the man in front of him with a dead serious expression on his face. The man had platinum blonde hair, just like A, and was styled the same as well. He also had a dark skin tone, which was common in Kumogakure. He wore black, oval-shaped sunglasses over his eyes and the Kumo Hittite with a white cloth on his forehead. His left shoulder had a kanji tattoo that read iron on it. He wore Kumo's standard one-strap over one-shoulder flak jacket, and a long, red rope belt tied around his waist, the standard Kumo hand and shin guards, shinobi sandals, and a white scarf around his neck. This man was Killer B, the brother to A and the Jinchuriki of the Hachibi. B nodded as he crossed his arms. He, too, was also serious, which was rare for him. His usual disposition was him doing his ANKO rapping like he always does and acting carefree. But this was too grave a situation for him to be like that. How many? And how long? A asked as he laced his fingers in front of his face and set his elbows on his desk. They were separated. The group I saw contained at least 10 shinobi. I couldn't tell their ranks from my position in the mountains. There could possibly be more than that. I estimate them at least a day away, the Hachibi Jinchuriki said to the Reikage, a hum to himself as he contemplated on the situation. Why would Odo have a squad so close to Kumo's borders? Were they planning an attack? If so, then he would have to ready the defenses to the village. Did they see you, B? The muscular Reikage asked. The reply he got was B shaking his head and then grinning. They can't see me when I hide because I've got ninja stealth on my side, the younger of the two said in a rapping fashion, waving his arms in front of him in order to make him look more convincing. The chance for this rap was too good for him not take it. The blonde Kage's eyebrow twitched when he heard his brother's reply. Not a day goes by with B always coming up with those stupid ANKO raps. Get serious about this, B. He yelled at his brother, who followed the command immediately. Get Naruto, Samui, and Yujito in here. Killer B nodded and then disappeared in a shunshin of lightning. When the container of the Hachibi left, A sighed and leaned back into his chair. I'd say that I'm too old for this shit, but then I'd sound like an old man, he said to himself and then stared at his door. You can stop eavesdropping and come in, Mabui. He smirked when he heard her make a high-pitched squeak and then saw her enter with a blush on her face, obviously from embarrassment. He had sent her out when B had appeared in his office with that serious look. The Kage knew that she was listening in, and he was sure his brother knew too. But since she's sort of his advisor besides being his assistant, he let her listen in. Besides, this way he wouldn't have to repeat anything to her. The silver-haired woman named Mabui took her usual place standing by his right shoulder. Why did you have beget Naruto-kun and the others here, Reikage-sama? She asked in a curious tone. Naruto-kun now is it, Mabui-san? He chuckled when he saw her blush on her dark skin. Anyway, I want to get some information from him before I do anything, but I am wondering what that snake, Orochimaru, is trying with this. For all we know, this could be a full-on invasion. Mabui nodded to her superior. I think it would be wise to think that, Reikage-sama. I wouldn't put it past the Sannin to try and invade us like he tried to do with Konoha a few years ago. But I can't think of any motives, she said to him after she gathered her thoughts. She saw him nod and then straighten up in his chair. She knew why, because she felt a few chakra signatures coming closer. It didn't even take a second later when B appeared back in the office and was followed by Naruto, Samui, and Yujito. Naruto and Yujito both wore confused, yet curious expressions on their faces, while Samui showed no hint of emotion, which wasn't really surprising. It was the Kyubi Jinchuriki who decided to speak first out of the three. What's going on, A-san? I was in the middle of training, he said, tilting his head slightly to the side. Naruto was confused because he was usually never called into the office without a reason. If he was, it was usually because the Kyubi's training methods would sometimes go hectic, to say the least. This doesn't leave the room unless I say otherwise, understand? The dark-skinned Kage said with authority in his tone. All of his shinobi, besides B, straightened up and were now waiting on him to tell them why they were called. Otonin were spotted by B nearing the village at a fast pace. He got a gasp from Naruto, Yujito, and Samui, a reaction much to his surprise from the cold Kunoichi. The group he saw consisted of at least 10 ninja and is at least a day away. Had B not seen this, we would have never seen them coming, he said, and saw the three of them take on their own looks of contemplation about the situation. Naruto was already assuming one reason why Orochimaru would suddenly try to invade Kumogakure. The blonde had guessed that Sasuke had either demanded or convinced the snake to come here so that he could try and gain the Manjikyu Sharingan. That bastard of an Uchiha will rue the day he chose to invade our new home for that despicable Dijitsu. Kyuubi roared behind its seal. Naruto nodded in agreement at what the kitsune had said. Both Yujuto and Samui were thinking along the same line as Naruto, since he had told them both about how Sasuke had threatened to kill him in order to gain the next level of the Sharingan. It was actually the only reason they could think of as to why Oda would have a squad, and who knows how many so close to the border of Kumo. The blonde Namikaze was the first to speak his thoughts. I think I know the reason why the snake is attacking us, Reikage-sama. Raised an eyebrow. It was because he was both bewildered and curious. He was bewildered that Naruto had called him such a respectful title, and he was curious because he would like to hear what the blonde thought. Go on, he ordered to the Namikaze. I think it's because of Uchiha Sasuke, Naruto said, and heard the Reikage groan in annoyance. Sasuke has always wanted the power to kill his brother, and in order to do that, he needs to kill me. It's the only way for him to gain the same eyes that his brother, Itachi, has, the Manjikyu Sharingan, the blonde explained to his superior. If that's the case, then we need to strike before they get to us, Yujuto said, putting in her 2 cents. Samui nodded at this strategy, in full agreement. Letting them destroy our village would not be cool, she said in her same emotionless tone and unchanging expression. The Reikage seemed to disagree with this from the way he gritted his teeth at them. And how do you expect us to do that when even our Sensonin haven't even reported anything to us yet? We're lucky we were even informed of this attack. He yelled at them and saw them lower their heads in thought. He took those few moments to calm down himself. The last thing he wanted to do was lose his head before an invasion. Samui-san, what level do you think that Naruto-san is at right now? B asked Samui, breaking out of his unusual silence. He was laughing inwardly, though, at the shocked face that his Busta student made at him. Well, she said, resting her chin on one of her hands as if in thought. I'm a high ANBU level kunoichi, and he can give me quite a challenge when we go all out in spars. So he's maybe close low to mid ANBU level right now. Why do you ask, B-sensei? Samui finished with a curious tone in her voice to her sensei. B smirked and then grinned at everyone. Then why don't we just take the fight to them before they get to us? We take them out now, and they won't be a fuss. He rapped, and nearly everyone's sweat dropped at the horrible rhyme he made. The only one who didn't was Naruto, because he just laughed in amusement at B. But when they were done being annoyed at the rap, they realized that what he said, and their eyes widened. A was the first to voice his opinion on what his brother said. Didn't you just hear what I said, B? We have no way of knowing how to find their numbers, the Kage said to the guardian of Kumo, expecting to see him quickly wipe that foolish grin off his face. But he was deterred when B didn't even so much as twitch at him. You won't have to send a huge force at the snake, bro. Just send us 4 to take out the leaders, yo. We can use our bijou to find their chakra signatures quicker than you can say no. The container of the Hachibi rapped again to the Reikage, who hummed to himself to show that he was thinking over his plan. A actually thought it was a good plan. Take out the leaders of a large force and the subordinates will crumble from disorganization. He was sure that B could take on the Sannin and was also confident that Naruto, Samui, and Yujuto could handle themselves against the snake's subordinates. As he thought of Orochimaru's subordinates, he quickly pictured the Uchiha traitor that was among them. Sasuke was an unknown to him because he didn't know how strong he was at the moment. He sighed to himself as he realized that it couldn't be helped at the moment. I'll just have to rely on them to be able to handle themselves for once. The Kage thought and then looked up at the 4 blondes. Alright, you have my permission to go along with B's plan. Be ready to depart within the hour, and if any of you die, I'll drag you back from the Shinigami himself and kill you again. Dismissed. He yelled and they all saluted him and disappeared in a shunshin. Naruto took a little longer though, because Mabui gave him a quick peck on the cheek for good luck, and then he disappeared in his Ranen shunshin with a small blush on his cheeks, which made a smirk at him. He waited until he was sure everyone was gone before he decided to tease her a bit. You know, I was just kidding when I said you could be a possible candidate for Naruto in the CRA 6 months ago, right? The Reikage said cheekily to his silver-haired assistant. Mabui blushed a little and then quickly went back to her desk outside his office, her eyebrows twitching at how A was laughing at her as she did so. Stupid old man, she thought to herself. XXX. 20 minutes later, Kumo front gate. B had been waiting for at least 5 minutes for the rest to arrive. The others were most likely getting in stealth gear for the mission, which was a smart thing to do. He would have changed gear too, but he thought he was much too a badass to do such a thing. That overconfidence of yours is going to be the end of you, B, the Hachibi wisely said to his container. Yo! It's not overconfidence 'cause I am a badass, FO show. The guardian of Kumo rapped in his head, but on the outside he was still using his arms to make the rap look more official. He was lucky that people saw him do that whenever he was in town, so they paid no mind anyone else, and they would assume that he had just broken out of an insane asylum. B got an annoyed groan from his tenant. The Hachibi wasn't a fan of the dark-skinned Jinchuriki's ANKO-style rapping. It annoyed the Bijou so much that he had to keep up his own mental blocks so that he wouldn't have to hear his container's incessant thoughts of new raps. It was all the man thought of. He only talked to B when he needed to and nothing more. That was their relationship, and it worked for them. The Hachibi container was interrupted from thinking of the new rhymes he was going to make by the three presences that made themselves known behind him. He knew who they were because he had been waiting for them in order to start the mission. B turned his head with a grin across face. They had indeed put on some new gear for the mission. Naruto had chosen to wear a Kumo-style ANBU outfit that consisted of a loose, black long-sleeve shirt, and the same color loose-fitting pants to match. He wore the white, one-strapped Kumo flak jacket over the shirt. He wore the classic black shinobi sandals on his feet since he was accustomed to those. On his forearms and shins were bracers that were white with black trim. To finish off his outfit was the cloak that his father gave him, waving wildly behind him. Samui donned her old ANBU outfit that looked the same as Naruto's outfit, but she had to adjust her flak jacket a bit because of her well-endowed assets that were located on her chest. But unlike Naruto, she chose to wear a mask over her face that reminded the Kyuubi Jinchuriki of Kakashi's since it covered everything but her eyes. Yujito had also put on Kumo's ANBU outfit, but hers had a slightly different color scheme. It was black like her two partners, but hers had dark blue tiger-like strips that licked the edges of both her shirts and pants. She had also put two of the same marks on each of her cheeks, making them look like whiskers. The three looked at each other to see how they looked. Samui and Yujito both lightly blushed at Naruto's outfit because it made him look almost heroic in their opinion, although they were thankful that B couldn't see their blushes from Samui's mask and Yujito's face paint. Naruto was able to hold back his blush from the way his two female friends looked in their new gear, but it was only barely that he was able to. After all, they were two of the most beautiful women in Kumogakure, and they were also two of the deadliest. Two things he liked in kunoichi who took their careers seriously. You look good in the outfit we got you for mastering Ranton, Naruto-kun, Yujito said with a smirk because she got the blush she knew he was fighting to hold back to come out on his whiskered cheeks. I agree with Yujito, Samui said with an unusual smirk of her own. It fits you well, she finished as she crossed her arms under her breasts, unintentionally lifting them up at Naruto, which made his face go even redder. Arigato, Samui-chan and Yujito-chan, Naruto stuttered before they all turned to B, who was still grinning at them, and waited for their orders. Killer B turned back around and had Hachibi try to locate the largest chakra signatures around the village's border. He knew that Orochimaru and his henchmen were most likely masking their chakra, but they were still no match for the Hachibi's sensing abilities. It didn't even take a minute before the second most powerful Bijou of the nine told him which direction to go, and then closed the mental link. B nodded and then made a gesture with one of his hands that told the others to follow his lead. He could practically hear them nod before he dashed in the directions he was given. Alright, so here's how it goes down. B started as they dashed around the rocky paths around the village. He knew these borders like the back of his hand, so they weren't going to get lost anytime soon. We fight the people that my bro said to fight and help each other out if you finish your opponent early, do y'all dig? He said in regular speech for once. That's fine with me, Naruto said with a determined expression on his face. I was planning on fighting Sasuke anyway. Ordered or not, I've just been itching to finally settle things with him. Are you sure you're going to be able to kill him, Naruto-kun? Samui asked, but her tone sounded slightly worried. You did say that he was your old teammate after all. Naruto nodded as he kept his eyes in front so that he didn't accidentally miss a step and fall down one of the crevices. Mountains were dangerous like that after all, yeah. I had a discussion similar to this with the Kyuubi. I made a promise to bring him back to Konoha, but I'll kill him if I don't have a choice. Samui nodded at the whiskered Jinchuriki, and then looked ahead as she continued to follow her former sensei, XXX. It was nighttime by the time B and the rest of the group got to the camp that Orochimaru was at. The Hachibi container was sure that the snake was there because it had the same chakra signatures that his Bija had led him to. From what they could see from the cliff they had perched themselves on, there were at least 20 Otonin in the camp along with their 3 targets, and from their chakra levels, they were all most likely high Chunin to Jonin level ninja. This is going to be tricky, Yujuto whispered to the others, who nodded in agreement. How are we going to do this? Naruto asked quietly as he surveyed the camp in order to try and find some infiltration points. He didn't just train in ninjutsu and kenjutsu all these 6 months. He was practically ordered to train in many different areas by the Raikage because the man wanted Naruto to be a well-rounded shinobi. Killer Bee hummed as he thought of their next step in taking down their targets. Any plan he came up with, though, would result all of them having to fight the entire camp anyway. Yo, Naruto, he said to the whiskered blonde, do you think you can take down all of the henchmen with your Haraishin, bro? Naruto's eyes widened at what the man had asked. As far as he knew, he never met Killer Bee, but the man knew that he was able to use his father's technique. Then again, he was A's brother, so he figured that Bee was informed about him and his abilities. The blonde slightly nodded his head to the sunglass Jinchuriki. I think so. It'll be easy to take down the Otonin, but as soon as I do, I'm sure that Orochimaru, Kabuto and Sasuke will know what's going on, so you 3 are going to have to distract them when that happens. Yeah, I figured that would happen, Yujuto said with the same quiet tone but then smirked. I'm ready. Samui nodded along with her. Her expression was unknown to the others, but, under her mask, she was lightly grinning from excitement. I too am ready to begin the ambush. Bee grinned and then stood up. All of the others followed soon after. Time to get this show on the road then, he said a little louder now since it didn't really matter. That was when Naruto threw multiple 3-pronged kunai at the camp and then disappeared in a flash of yellow. The screams of Otonin followed not even a moment later, showing that Naruto was succeeding in taking out all of the Sanin's henchmen with the Haraishin no Jutsu. The rest of the group began to get in their stances when they saw their targets come out of their tents to see the commotion. The battle with Orochimaru was about to begin. The Otonin didn't stand a chance when Naruto had ambushed them at their own camp. They were not expecting to be found out this quickly at all and were hoping to stay hidden from Kumo's forces so that their invasion went off without a hitch. Too bad that they forgot that Kumo isn't known for being one of the strongest of the elemental countries for nothing. The sight that Sasuke, Kabuto, and Orochimaru came upon when they exited the confines of the main tent, where they were making plans, was a blonde blur cutting down all the security in the camp like they were flies. He was moving so fast that their eyes couldn't keep track of him, making it futile to try and find out his identity. Orochimaru was gritting his teeth in anger as he watched this all happen. Those were some of his best soldiers that he was sure could at least give Sasuke somewhat of a challenge, and this thing had taken them all out in seconds. Who is that? He yelled at the 2 remaining at his sides. Kabuto had a permanent frown etched on his face. If one of the Sannin isn't able to detect whatever or whoever has infiltrated their camp, this was bad. No, this is worse than bad. He slowly put a hand to his kunai holster in fear as he didn't know whether he'd be dead in the next second. The last of the trio, Sasuke, still had an impassive expression on his face. He didn't care about the shinobi being slaughtered, but he did wonder what the jutsu that was being used was. It seemed so familiar to him that it was disturbing. He then shook his head. It didn't matter. He would just kill the fool ambushing them and take that power for himself. Then, I will surely be strong enough to kill Itachi, he thought with a smirk. After the Otonin were all gone, the blur had suddenly disappeared from the camp and none of them could trace to where it had gone. They tried using chakra to increase their senses, but the attacker must have gotten out of their range. XXX, the group's hiding spot. Naruto appeared back to the group in the same flash of yellow that he used to attack the camp with. He was surprised to find himself not even fatigued in the slightest. The blonde thought that it must have been due to the training he not only did in the village, but with his bija as well. The results were definitely worth it. Killer Bee was looking over the cliff to see the damage and whistled lowly when he saw all of the bodies. It wasn't a gory mess like he was expecting from a person who has barely killed before. All of the spiky blonde's attacks were quick and precise, just how a ninja should be. He grinned up at Naruto and put a thumb up in order to say great job. Without having to actually say it, they were still in hiding after all. He looked back to find the remaining enemies in the camp when he saw Naruto nod at him. Orochimaru was still searching for the culprit that had nearly taken out the entire camp within a couple minutes. His expression was one that showed anger. Due to him gritting his teeth and the contorting of his pale-skinned face, B was enjoying seeing one of the Sannin in such a state. His right-hand man, Kabuto, looked more frightened than he did angry. He probably thought that he was also going to die along with the rest of the Otonin that Naruto had killed. Honestly, B couldn't blame the guy because the Haraishin is a devastating technique, no doubt about that, and he heard that Naruto was still working on it as well. And finally, his gaze turned to the Uchiha. Sasuke was also looking around, but not as cautiously as he should have. He was turning his head in all directions, but in a slow pace that showed he was underestimating the enemy by a great amount. Wasn't he trained by a Sannin of all people? Wasn't he taught to never underestimate an enemy no matter the circumstance? All in all, B wasn't impressed by the Uchiha at all. Naruto is definitely going to kick his ass, yo, he thought, and then turned back to the group, who were waiting for his orders. Man, he loved being in charge sometimes. The Hachibi Jinchuriki nodded to them with a wide grin. Let's show them not to mess with Kumo, he said with excitement, and caused them all to feel the same as they nodded and jumped down the cliff to hide behind the rock formations that surrounded the camp. Killer Bee soon followed after them. The true ambush had finally begun. XXX, Orochimaru's camp. Now that the group was hidden, they just had to wait for B to start his attack in order to try and separate Orochimaru from Kabuto and Sasuke. The fights would be much easier that way. Divide and conquer was an excellent strategy for this situation. But they were still dealing with one of the legendary Sannin here. Simple plans like that just won't cut it against a shinobi like Orochimaru. If he were in a rational state of being, that is, they were going to exploit his flustered state to their advantage. B jumped up high into the air and morphed one of his arms into an octopus tentacle. It was one of the many things he could do since he trained in controlling his Biju's powers and abilities. He would have to get Yujito and Naruto to train on the Shimigame, Island Turtle. When all of this was over, he made his new appendage grow to a larger size so that it could do some real damage. The tentacle was now twice as big as Killer Bee but was still being easily lifted by the man, showing his strength. After he enlarged his arm, he thrust it down to where Orochimaru and his cohorts were standing. Orochimaru, however, sensed the attack coming and shouted a quick warning to Kabuto and Sasuke, and they all were able to dodge the attack at the last second, and thus, the first part in the plan had been achieved. The three were now separated from each other, and taking them out would be much easier. The Hachibi Jinchuriki used his speed to appear where Orochimaru had jumped to and tried to hit him again so that he could do some serious damage to the snake Sannin. But Orochimaru was able to parry the attack, although the force of the blows still made him skid back a few feet. You! The pale-skinned man snarled at B. Were you the one who did this to my ninja? His teeth were gritting in anger now and his fists were clenched with just enough pressure to make his own hands bleed. B simply grinned at the Sannin and answered in his normal fashion, which was ANKO rapping, Yo! I'm Killer Bee and I'm here to make you see why you won't beat me. This is my home you're trying to invade, so for that you'll meet my blade. He finished with a somewhat embarrassed look on his face for not rhyming at the end of the rap. Orochimaru was so stunned by the absurd introduction that he was just left gaping at B. He recuperated a few seconds later by shaking his head and then getting into his Hibiken stance. The taijutsu style he was taught by his summons. You wish to fight one of the legendary Sannin? He grinned evilly at his opponent. Very well, I shall indulge you. And with that, he dashed at the sunglassed man at an intense level of speed. XXX, nearby the destroyed camp. Sasuke had no idea who these ambushers were, but they did impress him with the slaughter of the Otonin that happened just a few minutes ago. Maybe he could use his Sharingan to try and make the one using that powerful jutsu teach it to him. It would certainly help in killing his older brother. His eyes scanned around him like a hawk, searching for anyone trying to ambush him. When that failed, he ended up having to sense with his chakra. It was one of the things he was taught by Orochimaru, saying it would be useful to know where his next victim would be. But he never did completely master the technique. Sure, he got it up to a decent level to where he could sense chakra signatures, but not to where he could pinpoint that signature. And that was the reason why he was standing still with dust floating around him like a ghostly shroud. The raven-haired ninja had his Sharingan activated in order to help see through the dust, since it allowed him to see chakra. All he saw was Orochimaru being sent skidding back to where he could not see by a man with a octopus arm? What kind of jutsu was that? It was during this little distraction where he suddenly felt a large chakra signature appear right behind him out of nowhere. His eyes widened and he turned around to block any possible attack coming his way. Sadly, it was too late, as the only sight he saw was four knuckles not even an inch from his face. Out of reflex, he closed his eyes and tried to lean back in order to soften the blow, but he did not feel an impact when he did. So he reopened his eyes, only for them to widen again at the person behind the fist that was still so close to his face. Surprised to see me, team? A certain whiskered blonde said, grinning at his opponent. Sasuke jumped back a few feet and got in a defensive stance. The Tomo and his Sharingan were spinning rapidly to copy any technique thrown his way. Dope? I see that the rumors of you being banished from Konoha were true then, he said with a smirk, trying to anger the blonde, make him slip up. Naruto just frowned instead. If you're trying to get me mad, then it won't work. I'm not how I was 6 months ago back at that hideout, Sasuke. He stood up straight and his hands were at his sides now as the dust cleared up fully. The only reaction Sasuke made was losing his smirk and raising an eyebrow at the statement. Only a few seconds later did that dreadful smirk reappear on his face. Then let's see how you face against an Uchiha with no one to help you. He yelled and began making hand signs at a rapid pace. Instantly, Naruto knew the signs for the jutsu and got into the stance he was taught to by the Kyuubi. Something he was extremely grateful for, the Kitsunken, Fox Fist. He then began to make hand signs for a defensive jutsu he learned from his mother's scrolls. Katon, Gukaki no Jutsu, Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique. Sasuke yelled before he made a circle with the index finger and the thumb of his left and breathed out. Suetun, Suijin Hiki, Water Release, Water Encampment Wall. The whiskered Jinchuriki called out and then finished with a clap of his hands and water building around him in a circle. It didn't even take a second for the water to erupt around him in the form of a wall. When the fireball collided with the wall of water, the result was a huge shroud of steam covering the battlefield. It was pretty thick due to the size of the fireball. Sasuke could still see Naruto's chakra signature in the steam because of his Sharingan. He was surprised to see the dobe of all people using such a powerful jutsu to block his own. What was worse, he was too busy using his own jutsu to copy it. Those thoughts alone made him grit his teeth in frustration, but he quickly calmed himself by taking a deep breath, followed by an exhalation. Apparently it was true to what Naruto had said in him not being the same since their last encounter. He was going to have to take this fight a little more seriously now. Naruto was using his large chakra reserves to sense Sasuke's signature, similar to that of radar. Kyuubi had also taught him this technique because it would be very useful in times like this, where a person's vision is temporarily impaired and they don't want to let the enemy get the drop on them. The blonde saw that Sasuke hadn't moved an inch whatsoever. He thought for sure the Uchiha would try to attack him with something, but he had done no such thing. I guess I'll just have to beat him to it then. Naruto thought with a grin and then started the hand signs for his most favorite jutsu. Rantun, Ryza Sakasu, Storm Release, Laser Circus. He yelled and the black and white beams fired out of his hands and made holes in the steam as they headed to their Sharingan-wielding target. Sasuke's eyes widened at such a jutsu being used against him and barely had enough time to dodge the attack. But to his shock, the lasers had redirected themselves and were now heading towards him again. There was no way for him to dodge the attack while he was in the air. He was going to have to go back to basics. The steam had cleared from the battlefield and Naruto could now see clearly. As soon as he could, he saw Sasuke's body on the ground, motionless and smoking. He quickly ran over to the body, albeit cautiously, and checked for a pulse. When he touched the unconscious Uchiha's neck, the body turned to smoke and reappeared as a log. Kawarimi, substitution. Naruto thought and leaned his head to the side, barely dodging a strike from Sasuke. He grabbed the arm and then lifted Sasuke into the air, planning on slamming him to the ground. But Sasuke was able to control the momentum of his body and simply kicked Naruto in the chest with both of his feet, causing his arm to be freed and landing safely to the ground. The kick didn't seem to have affected his blonde opponent though, only making him skid back a few feet. Stop playing around with him, Naruto. This is not the time for it. Kyuubi roared to its jailer from behind the seal that was on the blonde's stomach. Hearing this made Naruto nod and took one of his hands and arched it to reach behind his back. When it met his target, which was the handle to his family sword, He grasped it, and then slowly pulled it out of its sheath. Sasuke raised an eyebrow in curiosity and reached for his own sword when he saw Naruto doing the same. He was actually a little surprised to see that Naruto had a sword. Had he taken up to learning kenjutsu? This thought made his head shake and a smirk appear on his mouth. Like someone like Naruto could learn kenjutsu. He agreed that he was a little better than he was at Orochimaru's hideout, but the blonde was still not up to par with an Uchiha. They each took their own respective stances for their sword styles and gazed at each other, waiting for either one to make a move. The wind blew around them slowly and a small trail of dust made its path in the middle of the two. The Uchiha made the first move by narrowing his eyes and channeling right-un chakra into his sword and causing arcs of electricity to form around it. He then charged at his adversary with a ready striking slash prepared, hoping to end this fast. Naruto countered by quickly switching to a defensive stance and parried Sasuke's slash when the attack was thrust upon him. He noticed that something had made the Uchiha's eyes widen, but he did not know what it was. So, he used that momentary lapse in concentration to his advantage and turned his blade to the side, making Sasuke's sword and arm along in the same direction. Then, he used the speed he spent months on increasing to slash Sasuke relentlessly. They were only shallow cuts though, because even though he would not hesitate to kill the traitor, he still wanted to uphold a promise to one of his precious people, so, for now, he would settle for at least knocking the Uchiha out. However, Sasuke had regained his footing and began blocking the blonde's attacks. If only barely, the strikes of the black blade were so fast that even his Sharingan, with 3 tomo no less, had trouble keeping up with the movements. Now, their swords were grinding against each other, and the sparks sporadically shot off of Sasuke's sword while this happened. The raven-haired Uchiha was gritting his teeth as he looked at the face of his former friend, who was holding him off quite easily. Knowing that he couldn't get past the blonde in strength, he pushed away from Naruto and made some distance in order to collect himself. The cuts that he was now adorned with stung and would have made him wince had he not known worse pain. His sensei was Orochimaru after all. Pain tolerance was a must in becoming his apprentice. "How are you so strong?" Sasuke yelled in anger as his Sharingan was blazing. Naruto remained silent as he straightened his back into a more relaxed stance. "I told you I wasn't the same since we last met at the hideout," he retorted. "Shut up. It's not possible for you to have become so strong in a few months. I'm an Uchiha. No one should be able to beat me." The Uchiha yelled again as his breathing became more rapid because of his anger. The blonde sighed at this proclamation. "There's that arrogance again. Just because you're an Uchiha doesn't make you unstoppable, Sasuke. Your big brother knew this before what he did to your clan. Why can't you see the same?" Sasuke roared in anger, and sheathed his sword in one quick motion. He then made 3 hand signs and then pointed his palm to the ground and focused his chakra into his palm. Suddenly, his entire hand was enveloped in electricity and a loud screeching noise was emanating from it. It was one of his signature jutsu, the Chidori. Naruto narrowed his eyes at this and lightly tossed his sword from his right hand to his left, and then formed a Rasengan in the now empty hand. "Don't do this, Sasuke. You know I can beat you!" He yelled at the traitor and got ready to launch himself forward. The Uchiha didn't listen as he quickly dashed at Naruto, who also did the same, and their jutsu collided with each other. The two powerful techniques were struggling against each other to prove which one was more dominant. Back and forth the jutsu had gone several times in order to win this battle of strength. Sasuke was actually confident that he would win this because he had done so all those years ago. His gritted teeth turned into that of a maniacal grin as he pushed with all his might against Naruto's opposing technique. Now, the Chidori was merely a few inches away from Naruto, who closed his eyes and then opened them suddenly to reappear with crimson irises and slit pupils. He growled as he pushed the Rasengan with more power and chakra and completely overwhelmed the Chidori. His jutsu broken, Sasuke was sent flying back in a pinwheel motion and only stopped because of the giant boulder that was in the landscape, only with a human-sized crater now imprinted on it. Sasuke fell out of the crater with a pained groan and landed on his knees. He then began to breathe hard because he was trying to get air into his lungs, the Rasengan having hit him in the stomach. He looked up to see Naruto, who still had his hand extended and was now standing regularly like before. He glared at the blonde in hate, trying to bore a hole into his skull and kill him. The effort was wasted though because his small wish did not come true. The Sharingan wielder then got up to stand and struggled to do so. He might not have really liked Orochimaru at all, but he was definitely glad that he was trained to take damage. But he knew that he couldn't keep taking this much, or he would surely lose. Now do you see, Sasuke? Naruto asked as he looked down at the Uchiha who was using his knees now in order to stay up. The difference between us. I can kill you if I wanted to right now and end this, but I have a promise that I made, and I don't skip out on my promises if I can help it. The blonde was now walking over to his former rival/friend. Hearing this, Sasuke smirked again. This is what this is all about. You are trying to bring me back to Konoha? He began to laugh wickedly as his body became covered in black. Naruto stopped when he saw this and mentally sighed. He knew what Sasuke was doing now. He was using the Ten no Juin, Curse Seal of Heaven, to transform to his level 2 state. Sasuke's skin became a darker shade, closer to that of gray, and his hair grew longer without losing the same style. His eyes were no longer black but were a bright yellow with the 3 tomos spinning wildly like before. A black, cross-like mark appeared on his face, directly over his nose. The last thing that happened in the transformation was the 2 giant, hand-shaped wings that sprouted out of his shoulder blades and extended in a motion that made him look like his was about to take off like a bird. I will never let you take me back to Konoha, Naruto! Sasuke yelled and looked to be good as new in his transformed state. He straightened up and it would be discovered by Naruto that all of his previous cuts and injuries were gone now. Rapid regeneration? That didn't happen at the Valley of the End. This was unexpected, Naruto thought to himself as he got back into his sword stance. I can still win this, but I don't think I'll be able to bring him back to Konoha. I'm sorry, Sakura-chan. Sasuke took to the air and flew to a far range that Naruto could not reach, even with his jutsu. What was he planning was the thought that the blonde was having at the moment. Then, he saw the now transformed Uchiha doing multiple katan jutsu into the clouds that were gathered in the sky. Each cloud was absorbing the fire somehow and was now turning black. Thunder could be heard from them and lightning arced around at various times after a few more minutes of this routine that Sasuke was doing. Now, all the clouds above Naruto were thunder clouds and he still had no idea why his adversary was doing this. Was it for one of his jutsu? It definitely wasn't one that he recognized. It must have been during the 3 years of training with Orochimaru. In the sky, Sasuke was laughing to himself in a roar of derangement. This jutsu will end this battle and take out anyone nearby. He then raised his right hand toward the clouds and used his left to do the hand signs. One-handed signs were something he learned after seeing Haku do them back in his genin days. Kirin! Sasuke had yelled and the lightning in the clouds gathered together in a large amount, and took on the form of some type of animal that was not discernible at the moment. It roared loudly and then face down when Sasuke thrust his palm to the blonde. That was when it launched itself out of the sky and headed at its designated target, Naruto. The whiskered Jinchuriki knew he only had a little time to react, but the alternative was to become fried in electricity. So, gathering his chakra around himself as quickly as he could, he activated his right and no Yoroi, lightning release armor. The armor appeared in a golden color with blue arcs of lightning dancing across it. His eyes glowed white as he looked at the beast, and then spread his arms and legs that made him look like an eagle. When the lightning creature connected, a large and powerful wave of force spanned over the mountainous terrain, and sent any unexpected wildlife to be sent flying away to distances unknown. But there was no explosion, which Sasuke noticed even from the sky. Now that confused him. This was his most powerful jutsu in his arsenal and was extremely destructive. So why was there no explosion occurring like it did when he practiced with it so many times before? It didn't take long before a bright, white light flashed over the area where Naruto was standing and the wave of force had completely and suddenly disappeared. Sasuke closed his eyes when the light came, as it was too bright for him, and waited for it to die down. After it did, he reopened his yellow eyes only for them to widen at what he saw below him. It was only thanks to his Sharingan that he could see this at all. There stood Naruto completely unharmed from the jutsu and was still in his right and no Yoroi. Only it was much larger now and circled around him in a wide radius. He looked up at Sasuke with a sad look on his face as he sheathed his blade and pointed both of his palms at the flying traitor. I'm sorry it had to be this way, Sasuke. I hope you find peace in the afterlife, he thought, and then yelled out as his armor glowed, and then, in another flash, the technique that Sasuke had flung at the blonde was now coming back towards its creator. Sasuke had no chance of dodging the jutsu and merely looked at it in astonishment. How could this have happened? How did Naruto redirect such a powerful jutsu to him? His questions would not be able to be answered as he knew this was the end. He closed his eyes when Kirin was no less than a few feet away from him. So this is how I die, he thought, and the jutsu completely enveloped him as he screamed one last time before his body completely disappeared from the sky. Naruto deactivated his armor and a tear made a path down his whiskered cheek. Even though Sasuke was a traitor, he was still his first friend that he ever made. He may not have showed it back then, but he thought of the Avenger as a brother. But that Sasuke was long gone ever since he had tried to kill him at the valley. He wasn't the same person. He was replaced with a dark and murderous person only bent on power. But he would still miss the memories he shared with Sasuke before that happened. With a sigh, he wiped the tear from his face and then went back to a serious expression. He turned back to where he sensed the others were fighting and began to make his way towards Samui and Yujito, seeing as how he could take care of himself. 1. Sasuke was surprised when Naruto blocked the Kusanagi with his sword because it isn't supposed to be blocked by normal means. The Kusanagi was supposed to go through Naruto's sword and cut him, not be blocked. This will be explained at another time, and that's the end of this chapter. I hope you guys liked it because I spent a long time trying to figure out how to write this one correctly, but I am happy with the result, and hope that you guys are as well. So Sasuke is finally dead. I can't believe I finally got to the point where I could do that. Now I know you guys probably wanted Naruto to overpower Sasuke quickly and end the fight right away, but like I wrote, he was trying to keep his promise. Killer Bee was only barely able to dodge the sword slash that was aimed at his head by ducking and then rolling out of the way. He was frustrated at the moment. Scratch that. He's been frustrated ever since the fight started. The reason for this was because the damn Snake Man wasn't giving him any cushion at all for him to properly retaliate. If he was able to get all of his swords out and then use his Kenjutsu style, he knew he would do some serious damage to Orochimaru. But he was not able to because he's been too busy trying not to get slashed into pieces by a pale-skinned man. Sure, he was able to cut the Sannin a few times when he actually saw a chance to, but they were only shallow wounds and, ultimately, did nothing to stop Orochimaru in the slightest. For now, he had no choice but to wait until the Sannin got too tired to strike and then he would make his move. Even though Orochimaru was a Sannin, no one would be able to keep up the pace the snake was going at for too long. Well, except for a Jinchuriki. Having a Bija sealed inside you did have its advantages in that regard, and so Bee had no choice but to wait it out and try not to get killed by the homicidal Sannin. He hated waiting. It just took too damn long, especially in a situation like this where he has to fight someone with an inhuman amount of stamina. Fight! Orochimaru sneered as their blades grinded against each other, sparks flying off the opposing metals. Fight back, damn it! Give me a challenge before I end your pathetic life. He yelled at Bee. Yo! Say it, don't spray it, motherfucker. Bee grinned and then used his strength to make Orochimaru skid back away from him a few feet. Finally, he got some distance from the Snake Man. He quickly used this chance to get out the rest of his swords and then put them into the various bends on his body and then going into his stance. Now, the fight had truly begun. Killer Bee's grin widened at finally being able to use his Kenjutsu and having a better chance at ending this fight. He saw the Snake Sannin look at him with a shocked expression. So he took advantage of Orochimaru's current state by going on the offensive. He made his body spin at a rapid pace as he dashed at his opponent, making him look like a rolling ball with spikes attached. Unfortunately, Orochimaru was able to react fast enough and jump out of the way, but only barely. This meant that he got a few shallow cuts along the side of his right arm as he jumped away from the attack. When he landed back on his feet, he saw Bee coming at him again at the same rapid speed. The snake-like man had no choice but to try and block as many slashes as he could with his sword. Orochimaru had to use all of his knowledge of his Kenjutsu style to block the attacks that came at him. There were so many, and what was worse, they came in different directions with a speed that he was only barely able to keep up with. If he wasn't sick, he would be able to, but this body was deteriorating and he would have to wait to transfer his soul into Sasuke's body before he died. Bee yelled loudly as he opened up a deep gash in Orochimaru's chest and sent him flying back, colliding and breaking through a boulder that happened to be in the way. Yes, he finally got the bastard. Now, he just had to go and finish the job before Orochimaru was able to recover or escape from him. The Hachibi Jinchuriki took one step forward before he saw a bright flash in the sky over a different area of the field. Wasn't that where Naruto was fighting the Uchiha? His mouth gaped when the flash subsided and revealed a massive right-on construct with an animal form, but he only got a glimpse of it when it suddenly went down to the ground at a pace that was faster than his eyes could follow. B saw another flash and couldn't help but shield his eyes. It was so bright that not even his sunglasses had protected his eyes from it. When that one died down, he was confused by the lack of destruction in the area. Did the jutsu backfire somehow? He got his answer when the same beast flew back up to the sky at its original speed, most likely back to its original summoner. B concentrated chakra into his eyes to further his vision, and saw the faint image of a dark-skinned teenager with freaky wings being disintegrated by the jutsu. He would definitely bet that that was the Uchiha that was vaporized and most likely win. Killer Bee grinned at seeing that Naruto had won his fight, which reminded him, wasn't he supposed to be killing a snake right about now? He began to head his way to where he saw the Orochimaru go flying. Nuh! The echo of Orochimaru's voice could be heard by B, who didn't pause and kept going in the direction. He couldn't help but smirk at the way the Sannin looked right now. The snake was in a heap of rubble and had tears in various parts of his clothes, which were also stained from the blood that had been pooling from his chest. My body! Orochimaru continued with his yelling, completely ignoring B. That was to be my body and now it's gone. All these years of waiting, ruined. He coughed, and then finally saw the dark-skinned container. You. Who killed Sasuke? Who killed my perfect body? Killer Bee's smirk turned into his usual grin and began to rap. Yo, it was Naruto who killed your bro. He began as he used his arms like usual to make his rap more convincing. I know that it's a low blow, but I'm about to end your show. With the rap finished, he morphed his right arm into an octopus tentacle and made it grow large in size, like he did when he attacked the camp. Orochimaru's eyes widened when he saw this and knew what that idiot was going to do. But he wasn't able to move because his body sustained a lot of damage when he crashed through a boulder, and the gash on his chest that was making him lose a large amount of blood wasn't helping either. So, he cursed at the man before he closed his eyes and waited for the impact, which didn't come. He did hear it from a distance, though, which confused him. Orochimaru also felt wind, as if he was running, but he couldn't move. He turned his head just enough to see that Kabuto was carrying him over his shoulder, and they were both making a retreat. His second-in-command looked a little tattered but also looked good enough to perform a distance Shunshin no Jutsu, body flicker technique. Shunshin no Jutsu, Kabuto said as if he was reading his master's thoughts, and they both faded away silently as they heard B curse at seeing them escape. Now, B wasn't really an angry type of person. When he got angry, or if someone pissed him off, he would go to a secluded spot and write more ANKO-style raps. It was just the way he dealt with that emotion. So it would be seen as unusual to anyone who knew B to see him gritting his teeth and making his tentacle arms slam into the ground and creating a lined crater with it. The next thing he knew, he felt Samui's and Yujito's chakra signatures appear via Shunshin right behind him. So he quickly calmed himself and turned around to face them. B's eyes widened at seeing them with more than a few tears in their clothing but no bleeding, which was good. What the hell happened, yo? B said with only a slight anger lacing his tone. He saw the two's faces wince at it. We're sorry, B-sensei, Yujito answered before Samui could. He was more skilled than we thought with his Chakura no Mezu, chakra scalpel, technique, and we had to distance ourselves from him. We tried using jutsu, but most of mine are close range, as is Samui's, and he was fast enough to dodge our range techniques. Samui nodded at the words of her teammate. He isn't Orochimaru's second-in-command for nothing. Kabuto is a very strong individual, she said, and heard B sigh when he heard her. Come on, we're going after them, B ordered, and saw looks of confusion appear on the two kunoichi's faces. What about Naruto-kun? Yujito asked as they all began to make their way to where they had sensed the Sannin and his subordinate. Killer B didn't answer for a few moments. He knew that they should have all just stayed as a group, but they couldn't let Orochimaru get away. Their mission was to take him out, and B had never failed a mission before. He'll catch up, he said to them, and knew that they nodded at him, even though they were reluctant to do so. XXX. Naruto had been about halfway to where he last sensed his teammates' location before he stopped to make sure that they were still there. It allowed him to regain the chakra that he lost when he redirected Sasuke's right-on jutsu, It wasn't exactly an easy feat to say the least in doing something like that. He'd actually been amazed with himself when the adrenaline from the battle wore off. He doubted he'd be able to do something so risky again though. The only reason he was able to send the Kirin back was because he had an affinity to right-un chakra. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to use his right-un no Yoroi the way he did, instead of using it as armor. Like it was supposed to be, he absorbed the Kirin into his own jutsu. It took nearly all he had to keep the chakra of Sasuke's jutsu from overloading his own and killing him. Then he had to use his own skill in right-un manipulation to send the jutsu back at Sasuke. That part actually didn't take as much out of him. It was when his little stunt was done that he realized how much chakra he used in order to stay alive. Kyuubi had berated him for doing something so foolish and said that he was lucky that it had worked. He had apologized to it mentally and then, after looking back to where Sasuke was disintegrated, he ended up to where he was now. This was when he felt the chakra signatures of Orochimaru and Kabuto disappear for a second before reappearing quite a long ways away from their previous position. He guessed that they must have used a Shunshin no Jutsu because there was no way that they were that fast. Naruto also sensed his teammates' chakra were now on their way to intercept the two. The blonde Namikaze was just about to join them when he felt the ground beneath his feet begin to shake. He deactivated his chakra sensing ability and turned around to the epicenter that was causing the tremor. His cerulean blue eyes widened at the sight of a large, bandaged, blade-like object that was protruding from the ground and heading straight at him at a very high speed. He was able to jump to the side with only a few seconds to spare, but his eyes widened even further when the blade erupted from the ground, along with the man who was wielding the massive sword. Naruto recognized the attacker to be none other than Hoshigaki Kisame, one of the Akatsuki members that were tasked with getting Kyuubi. Kisame had a wide grin that showed his sharpened teeth in an intimidating fashion, making him look very similar to that of a shark, as he raised the bandaged sword that was known as Samahada easily with one arm and swung it down at Naruto in a chance to bisect him. Naruto was able to unsheath his sword and hold it up horizontally in order to properly block the incoming attack. When their two blades connected, Naruto was surprised at the sheer incredible amount of strength that Kisame was using. What scared him most about that was that it looked the Akatsuki member wasn't even using half of his maximum power. Fortunately, it was thanks to that Naruto was able to use his own increased strength to push Samahada to his side and leave him unharmed. He then took this chance to strike the now open Akatsuki member with one of his kenjutsu techniques, Kyumoryu Mikazukijiri, cloud-style crescent moon beheading. Naruto yelled as he swung his sword in a moon-shaped arc that left a luminescent white glow as it traveled to Kisame's neck. The blonde was actually surprised to see his technique work, as he saw the blue-skinned man's head become severed from his shoulder, and was now rolling in the air. His surprise turned to shock, however, when the head and Kisame's entire body suddenly splashed him when it turned to water. He used a Mizu Bunshin. Naruto landed back on the ground and immediately dropped his level in order to dodge another strike from Kisame's sword. He created a Kage Bunshin of himself after he was clear from Samahada, and it tried to kick Kisame upwards in the chin. Its foot was grabbed by the Akatsuki member's hand and was picked up like a rag doll before being slammed down at Naruto, yelling all the while. The clone exploded in his hand after Naruto rolled to the side and then tried to slash him with his sword. Kisame simply brought Samahada in front of him and allowed its size to easily block the attack. This made Naruto somewhat frustrated, but he calmed himself before he got sloppy. He stopped trying to win a battle of strength against Kisame since it wasn't likely that he was going to win right now and jumped away from him, gaining some well-needed distance. "Not bad, Gaki," Kisame said to him, his grin never faltering in the slightest. "You've definitely gotten better since the last time we met, but you're still not strong enough to beat me. So why don't you just make this easy on yourself and come with me before I make do with the threat I made 3 years ago of chopping your legs off? You can chop my head off and I'll still fight you from taking Kyuubi." Naruto yelled back. He then sheathed his sword before going through a sequence of hand seals at a quick pace. Kisame had tried to stop him from doing so, but he was fast enough to complete the set before could. He then thrust his palms outward to where they were now facing Kisame and shouted, "Rantan! Senbon no Shogeki, Storm Release! Senbon Bombardment!" Naruto's hands were enveloped in his Rantan chakra, one white and the other black, before a shower of Senbon made out of his bloodline element fired out of them at very high speeds. Kisame knew that they would do a terrible amount of damage to him if they hit, so he stabbed his blade in the ground in front of him, and used it as a makeshift shield. He couldn't count how many times he heard the Sanbon make a clinking sound as they bounced off Samahata and ended up on the ground. To stop the annoying sound, he decided to make this battle into something that would fit his element. Suiton. Baku Sui Shoha, water release. Exploding water colliding wave. Kisame yelled after making a single snake's seal, and water began pouring out of his mouth in extreme volumes. Naruto stopped his own jutsu when he saw the terrain become quickly surrounded in water. He was amazed at how fast the land became covered by the technique. But then his mind went back to the battle at hand and realized that how bad this was. He remembered from one of Kumo's bingo books that Kisame was an excellent user of Suiton jutsu, and while not on par with that of the Naidame Hokage, who could use Suiton techniques without any body of water nearby, Kisame was still a force to be reckoned with. He used his chakra control to keep himself steady on the surface of the water, as he looked up to see the still grinning face of Kisame, who was standing on a pillar of water that he made. It irked him at how that man could always keep that predatory expression on his face no matter what. He wanted to wipe that damn grin right off the bastard's face. But that was easier said than done. Not impossible, though. Last chance before this gets ugly, Gaki, Kisame yelled to the whiskered blonde. There's a reason why I hold back in my fights. When I go all out, people tend to not survive the ordeal. You get me? Yeah, I get you, Naruto replied, and a fox-like grin appeared on his face. But there's something that you don't happen to know about me. Kisame's grin faltered slightly and one of his eyebrows rose. And what's that? I was holding back as well. Kai. The few ninjutsu weights that Naruto had on his body were released and he could now move at his maximum speed. He hadn't needed to against Sasuke because of the difference between their skill levels. But now he was up against Akatsuki and he needed to put out all the stops if he was going to make it out of here alive. The former Kuririn saw the blonde disappear in a sudden burst of speed and his eyes scanned the area around him in order to get a fix on him. He was able to block the strike that would have severed his carotid artery at the last second and slashed at where the attack came from, but only slashed the air as no one was there. Kisame hated fighting fast shinobi. It was one of the reasons why he didn't fight Itachi all the time, that, and the fact that the Sharingan was a bitch to counter. So he quickly grew irritated at trying to locate the Kyuubi brat. Making good use of honed reflexes that came from his years of battle, he predicted where Naruto's next strike was going to be and swung Samahata with both hands grasping the hilt. The blonde had no choice but to block with his own blade, but the force of Kisame's swing overtook him and he was sent flying downwards toward the water and splashed as he was plunged into its depths. The Akatsuki member then jumped down to the spot where he saw Naruto go under and put his palm on the surface of the water and channeled his chakra into it. Suiton. Gashokozame, water release. 5 feeding sharks. He yelled as chakra poured out of his fingers and took on the forms of the vicious sea predators. Naruto opened his eyes to see the 5 chakra-constructed sharks coming at him with their mouths wide open and showing their razor-sharp teeth. Not wanting to lose any limbs, he activated his Raiten no Yoroi and electrified the water surrounding him. He saw the creatures writhe in pain before disappearing from being electrocuted by his armor. When he saw them be destroyed, he took his chance to begin to swim back to the surface so that he could get oxygen. He saw 5 more sharks formed by the chakra that came out of the tips of Kisame's fingers and coming at him in order to keep him underwater. The blonde didn't skip a beat as he made his armor send another electrical current towards them, and the sharks ending up like their previous brethren. He surfaced with a loud inhalation as he tried to get as much air into his lungs as possible. It was a good thing he did because he immediately had to dive back under to avoid a swing from Kisame that would have decapitated him. Naruto glared up at Kisame and began making hand seals to get a little payback at the fishman. Suiton, Suigaten, water release, water fong bullet. Or at least that's how it would have sounded when Naruto yelled out the jutsu. But since he was underwater, it came out garbled and incomprehensible. However, the jutsu still activated and he used his chakra to make multiple liquid, spinning masses around him and shot them at Kisame. Naruto was able to see his opponent having to dodge multiple times in order to not get hit by the deadly jutsu that he launched. He knew that they weren't going to hit him. That wasn't the technique's true purpose, though. They were for his distraction so that I could get out of this damn water. He succeeded in doing so and was now standing on top of the surface like he had been previously. His armor now deactivated, the blonde saw that Kisame was still dodging his jutsu. but noticed that he was doing it rather easily. Normally, he would have dwelled on this, but he needed to get out of here, because he didn't stand a chance against Kisame, not at the moment. But first, he was going to leave him with a goodbye present. Rantan, Rise as Sakasu. He yelled and fired a multitude of black/white beams out of his hands that navigated themselves around the Suiton Jutsu to hit Kisame directly in the chest. Naruto was actually quite shocked when he didn't see his body turn to liquid, proving that he did get the real one. With that done, he took out a 3-pronged kunai and threw it at a nearby mountain cliff before the Akatsuki member had a chance to recover. The Namikaze then used his father's famous technique to disappear in a golden flash, and was now overlooking the makeshift sea that Kisame's jutsu created. It went further than he thought. Alright, Naruto said to himself while grabbing the now embedded kunai that he had thrown to prepare for another jump. I've got to get back to the others. That way, we can fight him together and, hopefully, beat the bastard. Before he could throw his kunai in the general direction of where he sensed his teammates, which was very far from where he was now but nothing the Haraishin couldn't get to, he felt the cold metal of a kunai touch his throat. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Naruto-kun, a familiar monotone voice said from behind the blonde. Naruto was able to turn his head just enough to see the older brother of the person he just killed, Uchiha Itachi. He was the last person he wanted to see right now, not only because he killed Sasuke, but because there was no way he could take this guy on with the amount of chakra he had right now, which wasn't very high right now. Drop the kunai on the ground and don't try to use any jutsu. My Sharingan will know if you do. Itachi threatened, put the blade closer to the blonde's throat, making a drop of blood trail down his neck. The Namikaze cursed to himself, and did as he was told, seeing as he didn't have an option to do otherwise. When Itachi saw Naruto drop the 3-pronged kunai, he proceeded to bind the blonde's hands in a specially made chain that slowly drained the restrained person's chakra and would then use the absorbed energy to make itself stronger and tougher to break. These were used only for Jinchuriki since they had larger than normal chakra reserves, making them great tools in subduing the Bijou containers. And since Naruto had extremely high levels of chakra because of Kyuubi, he wasn't escaping anytime soon. Naruto's face grimaced when the Kyuubi told him what the chain was doing and had said that there wasn't anything that it could do about it. If it gave Naruto its chakra, it would only be absorbed by the chain and making it even more impossible for the Namikaze to break out of it. But he refused to give up. It was against his code to surrender to the enemy, and he wasn't going to break it just because of some stupid chain. However, before he could do anything, he was roughly turned around and his eyes met those of Itachi. He saw the Jujutsu change into its other stage, the Manjikyu, and couldn't help but feel a small shiver travel down his spine. Kyuubi had told him of some of the Manjikyu's abilities and he could say that he was not going to be a fan anytime soon. Tsukuyomi, Itachi said, and Naruto saw only darkness. Naruto's eyes opened slowly as he lay on his back in a place that he found all too familiar. He saw that he was in his mindscape, which confused him greatly. He remembered that being put under a Sharingan-induced genjutsu just a second ago, so, how and why did he end up here? He tried standing up but immediately felt a sudden feeling of vertigo as the world around him began moving, even though he was not. Naruto wondered if the sensation was coming from the effects of Tsukuyomi, but cast out that assumption because Kyuubi never mentioned dizziness about that particular ability. It took a while before the vertigo went away completely, and he was grateful for that. Again, he tried standing up and grinned when nothing happened to him. He looked around his surroundings to get a feel of where exactly in his mind he was at, which was one of the many corridors that he had traveled through in his mind during his times of training with Kyuubi. The blonde Namikaze had gotten lost the first few times because of how many paths that could be taken, much to the humor of the Kyuubi. It would laugh every time Naruto would end up back in front of it after only a few minutes each time he tried traversing his subconscious. But it was also thanks to all those times that he got lost that he finally learned where every path went, and he could expertly know where he was, even if all the corridors looked the same. So, he began to head through the hall-like area and made the various turns at certain forks where he needed to. It didn't take long before he was able to make it to the central chamber, or the room that Kyuubi lived in. Not much had changed from it in the last few months since Naruto completely changed its appearance, since the Kyuubi did not like being stuck behind a cage. It was still a large grassy plain that gave the kitsune plenty of running room. He even gave the giant fox demon its own den so that it could sleep comfortably. The blonde had lost count of how many times Kyuubi thanked him for doing that. Naruto had expected to see the Kyuubi somewhere in the altered mindscape, but instead he saw the person responsible as to why he was in his mindscape in the first place, Itachi. His cerulean eyes narrowed at the man as his hands clenched into fists. What the hell are you doing in here? He saw that Itachi merely ignored his question and used his right arm to reach behind him. The blonde heard a voice yelp in pain and his eyes widened at hearing that. Itachi had then brought back his hand in front of him, but this time it had a grip full of crimson hair. Naruto's mouth gaped at seeing the woman and guessed that she was the origin of the yelp he heard a few seconds ago. The Namikaze was wondering who this woman was. There was only one occupant that lived in his mind, and that was the Kyuubi. So who was she? He channeled chakra into his eyes in order to take a closer look at her to see if he could somehow recognize her. When he did, the breath literally escaped from his mouth. She was a very beautiful woman, that was either on par or even more beautiful than most of the women he knew in Kumo, which wasn't exactly an easy feat. Her facial features were soft, but she also seemed to show that she should not be trifled with either. She also had long, crimson-colored hair that Naruto guessed that if it wasn't in Itachi's grip, it would reach down to the middle of her back and flow like water or a slow-moving flame. Her attire was what really got his attention, though, since it wasn't really what he was expecting. She was wearing shinobi clothes, that was a definite, but they looked to be something custom-made since he did not recognize it from either Konoha's or Kumo's uniforms. He could tell by just a few glances that underneath her clothing she wore a fishnet bodysuit. Over that was a greenish-gray colored outfit that fit tightly against her perfectly proportioned body with a zipper running down the middle of it. Naruto held down the blush that was building up as he saw how much of her cleavage was showing because of the outfit. He also saw that she was wearing a type of belt around her waist that held a couple of satchels that he assumed contained weapons and black elbow pads for protection. All in all, it was the type of outfit a kunoichi would wear to distract their opponents by showing off their bodies. He forced himself to look back up to her face before he became distracted at her womanly figure. This was when he noticed something, or rather some things, on her cheeks that he did not notice before, which surprised him because they should have been the first thing he noticed. On each cheek, she had the same whisker-like marks as his, only they were thinner and not as dark. Naruto also noticed her eyes and saw that they were a dark red with slit pupils. The Namikaze's eyes widened as he realized that who this woman was. Kyuubi? Is that you? He asked, and she would have answered had her hair not been in the grip of the Sharingan-wielding Akatsuki member. Yes, this is the Kyuubi, Naruto-kun, Itachi answered for her. This is her true form. I wasn't expecting Kyuubi to be a woman, but it is of no consequence. You and I are going to talk, no fighting. Otherwise, I will sever her head from her shoulders. But you can't do that. Naruto yelled back to him. I thought that the Akatsuki needed the bijou as part of their plan. You wouldn't be able to complete that plan without her. Itachi nodded at this. That would be true if I were not planning on staying with them any longer, he said, and both Kyuubi and Naruto were shocked to hear him say that. Now, promise me that you won't fight and I will let her go. What's the matter? Kyuubi said suddenly to Itachi, afraid he's going to beat you. Her little outburst made Itachi make a painful tug on her hair, and she gritted her teeth in pain. The Uchiha ignored her question and waited for Naruto to give him his answer. Naruto didn't take long in unclenching his fists and nodding at him in agreement, so he released the human-formed fox and saw her get up and quickly joins Naruto's side. When she did, Naruto whispered to her, "How is it that he was able to get you like that? I know that you're the strongest of the bijou for a reason." His voice was low enough so that it stayed out of Itachi's hearing range. Kyuubi looked a little angry at the question, and she answered back while glaring at the man who dared touch her hair like that. It's the genjutsu that his Sharingan cast, Tsukuyumi. I was able to keep you from being trapped in the world that is created around the caster and the victim and got you two sent here. However, it seems that he is still able to control the mindscape as if it were his own. The control that you and I are supposed to have here are no longer a factor. The Namikaze took on a grave expression at this. So, until he releases the genjutsu, we're pretty much helpless against him. She nodded to him at this. But then why would he have me promise to not fight him? It doesn't make sense since he has the control. It is because that if you fight me, Naruto-kun, I may not be able to control myself from either hurting you badly or killing you, Itachi said, interrupting them and receiving shocked looks from the two. And I do not wish for that to happen. Kyuubi raised an eyebrow at this. Why exactly would you not be able to control yourself? You look pretty calm to me right now. Itachi shook his head at this. That is because of years of being a Konoha ANBU captain. I did not get to that position by not being able to stay calm under duress. As to why I would not control myself in that regard, it is because he killed the only family that I had left. He killed Sasuke. Naruto hung his head in contrition and remorse, but then he looked back up to the brother of his deceased friend with a hardened expression. I had no choice, he said. I didn't want to, but the Sasuke you and I both knew was gone. All I could see when I looked into his eyes was a hunger for power. He would kill anyone and anything as long as it made him strong enough to fight and kill you, Itachi. The Kyuubi nodded at this in agreement. It was that hunger for power that I was reminded of Uchiha Madara. Sasuke was a lot like him, and that is not a good thing. Had Naruto-kun not killed him, then he would have caused needless destruction on his path to get to you. The former ANBU captain listened to these words and wanted to disbelieve them, but, somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew they were right. He had always feared that Sasuke would lose sight of everything and everyone around him and concentrate solely on revenge. He blamed himself for this because he was the one who told Sasuke that he would only become strong enough through hate. But still, Sasuke was his little brother, the only family that he vehemently refused to kill on the night of the Uchiha massacre. So he couldn't help but want to get revenge on Naruto for what he did. However, he knew better than to do such a thing because then he would just end up like the rest of his clan. A bunch of revenge-driven people who did not care who died in order to get their vengeance. I will choose to believe you, Naruto-kun, Itachi finally said to them with a sigh. It saddens me that there was nothing that could be done for him. I never meant for him to end up like that. Kyuubi gave a condescending raise of one of her eyebrows before she said, You kill his entire family. Tell him to hate you and that being alone is the only way to become strong, and you tell me that you didn't want him to end up like that. Itachi actually hung his head as he looked to the floor and wore a pained expression on his face, as if he were reliving a horrific memory, and he was. For the mindscape had suddenly changed to what the Uchiha district looked like at the night of the massacre. The sky was black with no trace of any stars showing. The only illumination came from the moon that was giving an ominous red glow that looked very similar to the color of blood. Naruto and the human-formed Kitsune looked at this with open mouths as they saw Itachi going through the whole night, kill by kill. He was ruthless and unflinching, no matter whom his victim was. Even the children and the elderly were not spared any mercy from the prodigal ANBU captain. It was execrable to the two, to say the least. Then, the worst part came as it showed the scene where Itachi had just killed his own parents, and Sasuke saw it all. Itachi had then tried to escape, but Sasuke chased after him. He stopped running away and then told Sasuke to hate him, and that is when Sasuke finally gained the same eyes as him. Then he would be ready to face him. Next, he activated his Manjikyu Sharingan, and used Tsukuyomi on his little brother before disappearing and leaving Konoha. The mindscape reverted back to its original form after that, and Itachi looked up to meet their eyes again. As if nothing had happened, my reasons were my own why I did what I did. Had I not killed my clan, they would have committed treason against Konoha and possibly become the catalyst to the Fourth Shinobi World War, he said, and broke the silence that had enveloped the area. Naruto was the first one to speak between him and Kyuubi. What do you mean about all that? How could a war be started by your clan betraying the village? Kyuubi shook her head and said to the blonde, It would have caused a civil war, Naruto-kun, she said to him in a serious tone. It would give the other villages a chance to attack Konoha in their disrupted state, and cause a war between all the major countries of the elemental nations. The blonde nodded as he understood what she was explained to him, but something still confused him as he turned his attention back to Itachi. Then why were the innocent ones killed and not the true conspirators? They didn't deserve to be punished for the actions of the ones who actually were planning the treason. I was ordered to by the advisors of the Sandaime Hokage, Itachi said with a hardened expression. Sandaime-sama had been trying to negotiate with my clan to reach a peaceful alternative but failed in doing so. They had told me to kill the ones behind the whole thing, but Danzu, a person revered for his ruthlessness, input his opinion of me eradicating the entire clan to show what it means to trifle with Konoha. But Aji-san would never allow that. Naruto shouted back in shock. That's not the way he thinks when it comes to decisions like that. The order came from behind back, Itachi said, shaking his head. Danzu was able to convince the advisors that I should kill all the Uchiha so that they would no longer be a problem for the village. I had no choice but to follow the order, for a shinobi cannot refuse a mission by their superiors. Naruto grit his teeth in anger. Then it should have been the first one you did disobey. The innocent shouldn't have died because of some misguided old man's idea. His fists clenched and his chakra began to flare. Kyubi put a hand on his shoulder, which caused his head to snap to her. She asked him to calm down in as soft a tone as she could muster. It took a few moments before his chakra receded and he calmed down. It won't do to get angry at something that happened in the past. What happened is something we cannot change. He nodded at her words and then said, I know that. But I can't help but think that if the innocents were spared, Sasuke might have ended up differently, and not have led a life that was solely focused on revenge and hate. The blonde then sighed and exhaled one last calming breath and asked Itachi a question that had been plaguing his mind at the moment. What will you do now? Itachi contemplated a little on the question and thought that it was a very good one to ask. I do not know. My brother is gone and I have no reason to stay in Akatsuki any longer. The only thing that I know I must do is stop the Akatsuki's true leader. You're talking about Uchiha Madara, Kyubi said, and she saw Itachi widen his eyes. She smirked at being able to shock the stoic Uchiha. We know that he's alive and I've been training Naruto-kun in preparation for when we fight him. He's making progress but he is not ready to face him yet. I see, Itachi intelligently said in reply. The mindscape suddenly began to blur around them and Itachi frowned at seeing it happen. It seems that I've reached the limit of my Tsukuyomi. I must cancel the jutsu before I blind myself from overuse of the Manjikyu. We will have to continue this conversation in the real world. Naruto nodded at this, and the last thing he saw was Itachi disappearing in a fading motion like the rest of his mindscape. He also felt himself about to wake up, but before he did he turned to Kyubi and said, We are definitely going to talk later. The Namikaze stated and disappeared before the Kitsune could say anything in return. XXX. Mountain Cliff. Both Itachi and Naruto returned to the real world without incident, except for Itachi's eyes were bleeding from use of his Manjikyu Sharingan, and Naruto feeling a little nauseated. Their symptoms passed quickly within a few moments, and they were now debating about what they should do next. Naruto knew that Itachi was no longer going to be in the group trying to capture the apparently female bijou inside his stomach. He wondered if he should try and offer Itachi a place in Kumogakure so that they'd both be able to plan on how they would be able to take Madara down to him. It sounded like a good plan since Itachi couldn't really go back to Konoha without being executed for Kami knows how many counts of murder. If you have nowhere to go, I can try and get you asylum in Kumo, Naruto said as he was fishing for a Hiraishin kunai because he knew that he would have to leave before Kisame was able to find them. That is kind of you to offer, Naruto-kun, Itachi said emotionlessly. Maybe I shall take you up on your offer when after I am done dealing with some loose ends that I have in Akatsuki. Until then, I will remain in contact with you with one of my crows. The Namikaze nodded at this in agreement. Be careful, Itachi, Naruto warned him. They won't like you leaving them so suddenly. And you know more than me at how powerful they are. Do not worry about me, Itachi said in reply. I've lived my whole life being careful. By the time they figure that I've left, it will be too late. His eyes then narrowed for a second as he felt his soon-to-be former partner's chakra signature. You should leave now while you have the chance. Naruto also noticed the massive signature of Kisame and knew that Itachi was right. So, he got hold of a Hiraishin kunai and threw it in the direction that he last sensed his teammates, using chakra to make it go even further, and as soon as it reached far enough, he disappeared with a flash of gold and left Itachi alone. Itachi stared at the spot where Naruto had just been not even a second ago. He always did find the infamous jutsu of the Yandames was interesting and he couldn't help but marvel at its ability. He was brought out of his thoughts when the blue-skinned, shark-like man that was his partner appeared next to him in a swirl of water. He looked to be very angry at the moment, and Itachi guessed that it was because of Naruto. The blonde did have a way of pissing off his enemies. Then again, it wasn't that hard to piss Kisame off anyway. Where is the brat, Itachi? Kisame growled as he looked around area of the cliff. He was here just a few seconds ago. There was no way that he could have gotten away with you around here. The Uchiha turned his head to his partner, and then activated his Manjikyu Sharingan again. He knew that he shouldn't have used it again right after using Tsukuyomi, but he needed its power right now for what he had planned. Kisame, I think that you should know that I plan on leaving the Akatsuki. Kisame's eyes widened and he was about to get ready to fight his raven-haired partner, but he soon found that he was completely surrounded in darkness. Instantly, He knew it was a genjutsu since Itachi specialized in those and his Sharingan made his use of them very difficult to deal with. Luckily for him, he had a large enough chakra supply to break out of this genjutsu like all shinobi are trained to do. He formed his hands into the ram seal and used his chakra to break free from the illusion, or at least he thought he did. When he had done so, he noticed that the jutsu was still in place and Kisame wondered how that was even possible. "You are in a genjutsu of my own design, Kisame," Itachi said to him, answering one of the questions that were going around in his head. "I made this particular one so dense that the only way a person can break free from it would be if my victim were given chakra that only a Jinchuriki would be able to produce, and you do not have such luck, even if your own reserves are higher than most shinobi." Itachi then walked over to Kisame and was now in front of him. Kisame could do nothing as he was frozen still, another effect that Itachi had added to the genjutsu. "I will need someone of your strength when I leave the organization to help me with my plans. You're an idiot if you think that I'd betray the leader for the sake of your plans, whatever they may be," Kisame snapped, baring his sharpened teeth at the stoic man in front of him. The former ANBU captain sighed at this and closed his eyes. He then reopened them and then formed a half-tiger seal with one of his hands. "I did not think that I would be using this so soon, but if I must use it to make you help me then so be it," he said, and a flock of crows began to appear around the two. They were hard to see because of the darkness, but anyone would still be able to tell where they were because of their constant cawing. One in particular stood out among the rest as its eyes were not like the rest of its avian brethren. No, they were Sharingan eyes, in the Manjikyu stage to be specific. That crow landed on Itachi's shoulder, and its eyes bore into Kisame's, who found himself captivated by the gaze of the bird, Kodo Amatsukami. He heard Itachi exclaim a little louder than he'd usually be. His mind was being flooded with images that he knew weren't real, but the longer he kept staring at the crow's eyes, the more he began to believe in those memories himself. XXX. 1 mile away from the border to Shimagakure, Kabuto and Orochimaru were relieved when they saw that they were so close to getting out of the country to where they couldn't be pursued. The plan on the invasion had gone horrific, so they had to regrettably make a retreat so that they could make a better strategy in getting revenge on Naruto for killing Sasuke. Well, that was more Orochimaru's prerogative since Kabuto really didn't care much for the brooding Uchiha. But all that would have to wait as Orochimaru now had to find a new body to use before this one deteriorated. From how he fought against that jabbering idiot with the scarf, he knew that this body only had about a month left, maybe less. As long as he didn't do anything strenuous in the meantime, he would be able to recover fully and then show that buffoon why he was one of the legendary Sannin. The snake-like man also made a note in his head to find a way to reward his silver-haired subordinate somehow for saving him from dying a most humiliating death. Kabuto always was hard to please as he only seemed to like to do his bidding. Maybe find a way to give him a bloodline. Yes, that would do nicely. Before he could continue his internal musings, he felt Kabuto stop and standing completely still. Orochimaru looked ahead to see as to why his subordinate would do such a stupid thing, and he grit his teeth in anger when he saw that the Kumonin were able to catch up to them and stood in front of them, in battle-ready position, and effectively blocking them from reaching the border to Shimo. "Set me down, Kabuto," Orochimaru ordered while his eyes narrowed at Killer Bee. "I have a score to settle with that imbecile over there." "But, Orochimaru-sama," Kabuto exclaimed with shock, "your wounds have not healed yet and you are in no condition to fight. Our only option would be to try and get away from them at this moment." Annoyed at the one time Kabuto chose to be disobedient, he opened his mouth wide above him. A large snake slowly came out of his mouth, causing his throat to enlarge sickeningly. The reptile then opened its own mouth and all that were present saw the snake regurgitate another Orochimaru, with no signs of injury and looking as if he had never fought Bee in the first place. Kabuto dropped the old skin of his master to the ground as soon as he saw this happen. It was a technique that even made his skin crawl. Despite the horrors he had done while aiding Orochimaru in his experiments, the snake Sannin grinned evilly as he licked his lips with his abnormally long tongue. "Ah, much better," he said with a sigh. "I have been waiting until I got enough chakra back before I could use that jutsu. It is so very handy when in tight situations. Now, I think that it's time to show you bothersome Kumo pests why you shouldn't back a snake into a corner." With that said, his lower body mimicked the tail of the reptile he was famous for using and slithered at them at very high speed. He headed straight for Bee as he wanted to hurt the man that had severely injured his previous skin. His Kusanagi slid out of his mouth, and stopped at the hilt, and he used it to slash at B at an upwards angle. B was able to dodge it, fortunately. By hurling himself to the side just in time, he rolled on the ground and got back up on his feet before he yelled to his teammates, "I'll handle the Snake Man. Yo, you two go after Kabuto." He rapped at them and they didn't even bother to get annoyed with his terrible rapping as they charged at the menin. He turned his sunglass-covered eyes back to Orochimaru, and saw that the man was going after him yet again, with a maniacal grin as he tried again to slash him with his sword. B quickly took out one of his 7 swords and blocked the attack while putting right-un chakra into his blade. When Orochimaru saw that the Kusanagi wasn't cutting through the bees, he was internally surprised. His sword was supposed to be able to cut through nearly anything, so why wasn't it able to do so with his opponent's blade? No matter, he could always ponder about this later. Right now, he had an annoying man to slash to pieces. While their 2 swords were grinding against each other, he quickly formed a few seals with his pale hands. Futon, de Tapa, wind release, great breakthrough. He yelled, and a violent gust of wind caused B to be pushed off his feet and sent back a few meters. Luckily, he was able to regain his balance as he was in the air and landed on his feet, sliding on the ground before stopping. B narrowed his eyes behind his glasses and took out the rest of his swords so that he could beat down the snake's sannin like he did before, placing them at the various bends in his body. He then began to spin rapidly and headed towards Orochimaru, intent on severely injuring him again. The sannin retracted the Kusanagi and grinned as B was headed toward him at a very fast pace. He went into a prone position with his whole body hugging the ground as he widely opened his mouth and a torrent of snakes practically erupted from it. He called this his Mandara no Jin, formation of 10,000 snakes, technique. It was one of his most effective offense/defense type jutsu. The snakes formed a wall in front of B and, due to their vast amount, made it dense enough to stop B from spinning as soon as he hit it. They then took this chance to sink their teeth into his flesh to poison him. Others in the wall protruded small, but similar to Kusanagi, blades out of their mouth and proceeded to stab him in very vital areas of his body. As soon as they did though, B's body turned into a large piece of what looked like an octopus tentacle. B was at a very far distance from the mass group of snakes and Orochimaru. He knew that if he hadn't done that Kawarimi, he could be dead from the venom from all those bites or all those fatal injuries that he couldn't sustain from them stabbing their swords into his body. He grimaced when they all began to head to where he was and prepared to do something he hadn't done in a while, transforming into his full Bijou mode. He took on the form of the Hachibi and roared as the snakes came closer. He pounded the middle of the snakes with one of his massive fists, and knew that he killed at least a good chunk of them. But there was still thousands left that were able to slither up his giant form and bit their fangs into his skin, which broke when they tried to. His skin wasn't that of a human's after all. "There's no way that you can hurt me. That's why they call me the Killer Bee." The transformed bee yelled in Enka, "Now, it's time for me to show you all not to mess with my home." He spun around in one quick revolution, and the snakes that were on him flew off and fell to their demise. Orochimaru growled as he looked at B's new form and formed a few seals before slamming his hands down on the ground while yelling, "Kuchios no Jutsu." A seal formation appeared on the ground and a giant cloud of smoke plumed around him as the boss to the contract he signed was summoned. "Orochimaru, you worm!" yelled a booming voice as the smoke slowly began to fade and revealed the form of Manda, the boss of the snakes and a deadly opponent to anyone, even to the one who summoned him if he was not given a proper sacrifice. "I told you that you not to summon me without a proper sacrifice. You're not living up to the contract that I made for you." The Sannin chuckled from his position on the purple-skinned snake's head. "Forgive me, Manda," he said as he licked his lips, "but I thought that a fully transformed Jinchuriki would be enough of a sacrifice for you." Manda turned his attention away from the snake's Sannin and onto B's raging form as he continued to slaughter the snakes that Orochimaru summoned, his brethren. His green eyes narrowed as he hissed at seeing his kind being killed left and right. "We will discuss how you blatantly send my kind off to be killed after I deal with him, Orochimaru." The Sannin grinned evilly and replied, "Of course, now let's go." He yelled and Manda shot off toward Killer B. XXX. Meanwhile, Kabuto was fending off Samui and Yujito with his Chikura no Mezu technique as they tried to use teamwork to defeat him. He smirked at them as they were trying to regain some breath after he came so close to hitting some of their organs. "I didn't think that Kunoichi from Kyumo were so weak," he taunted as he fixed his glasses with one hand, temporarily deactivated his jutsu before reactivating it after he did so. Even when it's 2 against 1, your attacks are useless. I'm disappointed from the lack of challenge. Yujito growled at him, and Samui frowned as she held up her sword. You should not underestimate us for simply being able to dodge some jutsu, she said to him as her sword began to glow with right-un chakra. Otherwise you will end up dead. Heh, bring it on then, Kabuto said as he held up his palms and pointed them toward the 2 blondes. Maybe after I am done killing you I will be allowed to experiment on your corpses. No way in hell that's going to happen, sicko! Yujito yelled as she began using Nibi's chakra and forming a cloak of her Biju chakra around her, taking on the form of a cat as it surrounded her body. The pupils in her eyes also formed into slits and her nails grew longer and sharper, becoming even more of a feline. Ready, Yujito? Samui asked and got a nod in reply from her transformed companion. Good, try not to let him kill you. Yujito smirked when she heard this, showing that her teeth had sharpened as well. I should say the same thing to you. Now let go. I've wanted to wipe that smug look off his face, she said and made a dash at Kabuto, running on all 4 of her limbs and making her go faster than she would if she just ran on her legs. Kabuto narrowed his eyes as he quickly went into his taijutsu stance and prepared for a frontal assault from the Nibi container. She had tried to slash him with her nails, but he was able to dodge it easily enough and retaliated by striking her chest. His eyes widened though when he felt his palms feel warm for a second and chose to bring his hand back and jumped away from her. He looked down at his hand and saw a small burn on one of his fingers and even saw it smoking a little. I didn't even touch her for 1 second and I got burned. Her Biju chakra must have properties of fire. I won't be able to touch her as long as she has that cloak activated. He looked back up and frowned at his realization, but he kept his composure. However, his danger senses were going wild suddenly, so he instantly dropped his level to dodge a slash that came from behind him by Samui. If he had not been trained to anticipate sneak attacks like that, he most likely would have had his spinal cord severed. But he used this chance to place a strike on one of her legs to make her immobile. Samui jumped up to avoid his obvious intention and then held her blade over her head as if she were going to chop something, or in this case, someone. Kumoryu, Judo no Danto, Cloud style, severe guillotine. She yelled as she swung it down and a blade of chakra shot out of her sword and heading towards Kabuto's neck. Without any time to hesitate, Kabuto made use of his elemental training as he sank into the ground. He made sure to go deep enough to where her attack did not touch him as he felt the earth around him shake and he was sure that there was a crater just above him. Thanks to the jutsu that he used to go underground, he was able to sense the magnetic forces around him and pinpoint exactly where his 2 opponents were. Kabuto targeted Samui since he thought it to be foolish to try and touch Yujito again since he would not come out unscathed if he tried to attack her again. So, he used his chakra to help him get through the earth very fast and got right under where Samui was, which was just outside the crater that was made from her attack. He smirked as he erupted from ground and was prepared to strike at her lungs, but his eyes widened when he came to the surface. He was surrounded by a cage that was made of blue fire, and he knew that anything that touched those flames would most likely be incinerated. Kabuto made a move to go back underground via his Doton Jutsu but was stopped when he heard Samui yell out a jutsu. Right-un, Ketsugo Kenhin, lightning release, binding imprisonment. And rope-like tendrils shot out of her body and coiled themselves around Kabuto, restraining his limbs so close to his body that it was even hard for him to breathe due to the pressure on his ribs. He squirmed as he tried to at least form a one-handed seal, but even his fingers were immobilized by her jutsu. Samui actually smirked as she looked down at him and felt satisfied that they were able to beat him this time. He was too overconfident after their last fight, and now he was paying for it. You're wasting your time trying to get out of that particular jutsu. It was designed to hold B-sensei when he was training to control the Hachibi's chakra, so there's no way you'd be able to escape from it, she said to the medic Nin, who rolled his body to his side to look at her. It seems I grew rather careless for falling for such a simple tactic, Kabuto said to her, as he breathed slowly as sharp breaths seemed to make the jutsu constrict tighter. Samui couldn't help but nod at this as she made her way to one of the walls of the blue-flamed cage that was around the both of them. When she was in front of it, a hole opened up that was just the perfect size for her to walk through, and so she did. She then walked over to Yujito, who was holding a hand seal to keep the prison up. Yujito smiled at her before turning back to Kabuto and narrowing her eyes. Should I kill him? she asked Samui, bringing down her chakra cloak as well since she didn't need it. The busted blonde shook her head at the question. No, we should bring him into Reikage-sama. The information he would have on Orochimaru would be useful to both us and our allies. With luck, we'll be able to track down any of his bases and shut them down. Kabuto's lips curled into a smug smirk as he thought what they said was amusing. You really think that I'd give up that information? Did all your brains suddenly go back into those watermelons you call breasts? He asked, only to wince in pain as the binding jutsu got tighter and was now struggling to get some air in his lungs. Oh, you really shouldn't have said that, Yujito said to him with a grin. She really doesn't like it when people make fun of her breasts since they're the reason why she keeps getting sore shoulders. The last guy that did so ended up staying in the hospital for around 8 months due to how injured he was. One of Samui's eyebrows slightly twitched as she flicked Yujito on the forehead. Don't say things like that to a captive, Yujito-chan. She chided with annoyance in her voice before looking back at Kabuto with narrow eyes. And you're lucky that we need you both alive and conscious. Samui then loosened her jutsu just a bit to allow him to at least breathe properly. Now, enough playing around, she continued as she looked up and saw the fight going on between Manda and Killer Bee in his Hachibi form. We need to help Sensei with Orochimaru, however. We can't just leave him here like this, so only one of us will be able to go. Yujito frowned as she thought about this. She could go, but Samui wouldn't be able to hold her jutsu forever. And if Samui would go, then Kabuto would be able to escape through that Doton jutsu of his, since her Kanpiki no Kago, Azure Cage, was only a surface jutsu. It was truly a losing decision no matter who chose to go. Her thoughts were interrupted when she saw a kunai land on the ground, and she instantly recognized it to be one of the 3-pronged ones that Naruto used for his father's jutsu. Not even a second later, the whiskered Namikaze appeared in front of the kunai with a golden flash and picked it up. Naruto-kun! Both Samui and Yujito said together, and he looked up to see them and noticed the state of their shinobi wear. He frowned for a second and then noticed the captured Kabuto and figured that he was the one that had done it. I see you guys were able to get the snake bastard second in command, Naruto said with a congratulatory tone, and was also satisfied at seeing the silver-haired medic scowl at that. He then felt the ground shake suddenly, and he noticed that Bee was fighting the boss summon of Orochimaru's contract. We need to help him. Samui nodded in agreement as she crossed her arms under her chest. Yujito and I were discussing who should go, but it seems that neither of us would be able to, seeing as both options would eventually lead to Kabuto escaping. Naruto hummed for a second in thought, and a wide grin slowly broke out on his face after a few moments passed by. I've got just the thing, he said to them, making the 2 blonde females raise an eyebrow as he walked over to the prison that Yujito created. You think you can let me in? Since Yujito always had the curiosity of a cat, so she opened a hole in her jutsu just like she did for Samui, and saw Naruto step in and kneel on the ground in front of Kabuto. Naruto then rolled up the sleeve of his right arm, revealing a sealing array that he apparently had on his forearm. With his left hand, he focused some chakra into his index and middle fingers and then put them on the sealing array, and a large scroll popped out of it in a puff of smoke. The Namikaze then unrolled it and put Kabuto, who was now squirming again but to no avail, in the middle of it. Fuin, seal, he said, and slammed his palms onto the scroll, and Kabuto was sealed into it instantaneously. Seeing this, Yujito let down her blue flame jutsu, and both she and Samui went over to Naruto as he was putting the scroll back into his forearm. I didn't know that you put arrays onto your own body, Naruto-kun, Yujito said to him. I put them on for just in case reasons, Naruto replied, standing back up and patting the dirt off of his pants. You never know when you'll need to transport a prisoner, at least. That's what Kyubi always says anyway. Let's go help Bee and put an end to that pale-skinned psycho. The 2 Kumo Kunoichi didn't need to be told twice as they followed Naruto when he ran towards the colossal forms of Bee and Manda. XXX. The trio appeared on top of Killer Bee's head as he was holding off Manda from biting him. He had one hand on each side of the snake's mouth, and he found that even he was having a little trouble keeping Manda away. Bee looked up to his forehead and saw his 3 teammates and grinned. About time you got here, Naruto. I need some help with this stupid snake, yo. Bee rapped as his body was pushed back a little bit. Naruto nodded and focused some chakra into his eyes to see Orochimaru standing on top of the opposing summon's head. He was annoyed to see the Sannin smirking at him and flailing around his tongue as he usually did. He also saw that the snake man was in a battle-ready stance, which meant that he was prepared for if any of them tried to jump onto Manda's head to face him. The blonde Namikaze looked at Samui and Yujito without turning his head before saying, "Let's take him down." And with that said, they all used their own variations of the Shunshin no Jutsu and appeared in front of Orochimaru. As soon as they did, they were put on the defensive as Orochimaru quickly closed the distance between them and began slashing at them very precisely. Naruto retaliated when he was able to unsheath his own blade and began blocking Orochimaru's strikes as fast as they came at him. Sparks flew as the colliding metals of their blades met in intervals that lasted less than a second each time. He was waiting for an opening but saw that Orochimaru wasn't giving him any. Just what he expected from a Sannin. This was definitely going to be tougher than all those Kenjutsu spars he had with Samui, and Yujito, and every other person in Kumo that practiced the art. Orochimaru was actually quite surprised to see that Naruto's sword had not broken when it blocked the Kusanagi. It must have been made of a very strong and durable metal to be able to do something like that. As soon as he killed the foolish blonde, he would have to take the sword as his own. A blade that can stand up to the Kusanagi is definitely something worth keeping. And then I shall get my revenge against him for killing my body. The snake Sannin continued in his head. He then opened his mouth and shot out another sword out of it at a high speed in an attempt to catch Naruto off guard. He saw an opening when Naruto dodged it by sidestepping to the right, and prepared to make him pay for it as he stabbed his blade at the blonde. However, his sword was stopped when a rope that looked to be made out of right-un chakra and diverted his intended target, and ended up missing Naruto completely. Orochimaru growled in anger at this when he saw that it was Samui on the other end. He used his sheer strength to pull at the rope and caused the shocked Samui to head straight for him. He then made his tongue lengthen and made it wrap around her neck and began to choke her. Samui tried to get free by cutting the tongue off, but her sword kept bouncing off it. She realized that he was covering it in chakra and she grimaced. While her sword was stronger than many others in Kumo, it could not cut through a chakra defense that could be made by a Sannin of Orochimaru's caliber. "Let her go!" Naruto yelled at the Sannin and got an evil chuckle in return. "How about I squeeze the life out of her?" Orochimaru said, and increased the pressure on Samui, making her gasp as she wasn't able to get enough air. Naruto growled, and for a split second his eyes flashed crimson red before he began forming hand seals at a rapid pace. "Rantan! Raiza Sakasu!" He yelled, and the two black and white beams of one of his signature jutsu fired themselves straight at Samui. But just as they were an inch from her, they quickly changed their path and went around her and right at Orochimaru. The now wide-eyed Sannin retracted his tongue, freeing Samui, and began to try and dodge the jutsu that Naruto had used. He had to jump back dozens of times and dodge the beams as they came close to touching him. However, his body had chosen to suddenly freeze up and he began coughing up violently, showing that this body was failing at a very rapid pace. He was only able to get out one cough before he screamed in pain as the Rantan jutsu hit him and began to electrocute him. But much to everyone's shock, his body turned into mud, and that made them immediately go on alert. Naruto's eyes snapped open before he spun around and put his sword in front of his face horizontally, blocking an attempted sneak attack by Orochimaru. He tapped into Kyuubi's chakra for just a second to push Orochimaru off and send him back a few feet in order to create some distance. "Not bad, Naruto-kun," Orochimaru said to the blonde. "You've gotten better since that little incident at Tenchi Bridge. However, you're still nowhere near my level, so why don't you and your two whores just give up and let me kill you and save you the humiliation?" Yujito growled at this, and Samui narrowed her eyes when they heard the insult at them. Naruto gripped his sword tightly and got into his clan's Kenjutsu stance, except this time he held the blade in reverse. "There is no way in hell you're going to get away with calling my friends that," Naruto said coldly as he narrowed his eyes. "Samui, Yujito, leave him to me." They knew he was serious since he didn't use his usual honorifics for them. "If anything goes wrong, we're stepping in," Samui said, sheathing her sword and crossing her arms under her breasts. The way she said it left no room for debate, and she knew that Naruto knew better than to argue with her. The whiskered blonde nodded without looking away from the snake Sannin before dashing at the highest speed he could muster, and phased out of sight from everyone. Orochimaru was impressed by the speed but was still able to block the multiple attacks that seemed to be coming from all directions. Orochimaru then elongated his tongue and lashed it out in front of him in a coiling motion. Naruto was now visible and the slimy appendage was wrapped around his waist. He brought up his sword and prepared to swing at the tongue, making Orochimaru's eyes widen as he knew that Naruto's sword would actually be able to cut it. So, He quickly loosened it to get away from that possibility, but his eyes widened when Naruto caught his tongue with his hand and pulled him towards the blonde. Naruto had a smirk on his face as he had the chance to get to do what Tsunade had done to the snake bastard, and he relished that moment as he hit Orochimaru with a chakra-infused punch that sent the Sannin flying. Naruto disappeared in a burst of speed and met with Orochimaru in the air, and flipping over with one of his legs extended, he slammed it down on the snake man's sternum, causing the man to lose his breath, and caused him to be sent flying down at Manda and impacted hard against the summons. The blonde landed swiftly just as Orochimaru was slowly getting up. "Still think that you're going to win this, Orochimaru?" he asked while pointing his sword at his opponent. "Shut up!" The snake man snapped, and then began emitting chakra from the fingertips of his right hand and then making a slicing motion at Naruto. Knowing what the bastard was using, he clapped his hands together and then yelled, "Futon, Kaze no Kiba, wind release, wind fawn." He yelled and made a vertical slash in the air and blade that looked similar to that of a sharp fawn and immediately met the jutsu Orochimaru used, the Kaze no Yaiba, blade of wind, and the two opposing techniques were now fighting against each other, trying to overpower the other. Naruto used the jutsu again to double the power of the previous one. It worked, as the two combined and completely broke through Orochimaru's wind jutsu and was now heading towards him. The snake Sannin grimaced for a second before transforming his lower body into a snake's tail like he did against B and slithered to the opposite side of Manda, avoiding the jutsu completely. Yujito and Samui had to dodge Naruto's technique. Otherwise they would have sustained horrible damage. Orochimaru had quickly appeared in front of Naruto thanks to his increased mobility from his transformed body, attempted to bite Naruto on the neck, not wanting to get a curse seal like Sasuke. Naruto lowered his level, avoiding the lunging face of Orochimaru, and then thrust his sword at him. However, his attack missed as Orochimaru's body bended itself to the side, exactly like what a snake would do. Orochimaru grabbed his arm with an iron grip and then coiled his tail around the blonde's body and immobilizing him. He grinned at seeing how helpless the Namikaze was. "You've done well, Naruto-kun," the Sannin said, licking his lips, creeping Naruto out. "But like I said before, you are not near my level yet, and now I think that it is time for you to die. Goodbye, Naruto-kun." He then opened his mouth wide and plunged his teeth down at Naruto, who could do nothing to avoid the bite. Naruto's lips curled into a grin just before he was going to be bitten and disappeared in a golden flash. Orochimaru was shocked to see the blonde disappear the same way as the man he hated for taking the Hokage position from him. He had no time to try and find out where the whiskered blonde was as a sword protruded from his chest. He looked down at it, and saw Naruto's black blade covered in his blood. Orochimaru then felt a pull and he didn't know what it was except for the fact that he could just feel himself being absorbed into the sword. He had no time to scream out any last words as his body was completely gone. Naruto couldn't help but blink in confusion at what had just happened. "Since when can your sword do that?" Yujito asked, and unknowingly speaking one of the questions that he was asking himself. "No idea," he said back as he looked at his sword in wonder. "I'll have to research its abilities when we get back to the village." Naruto turned back towards them and saw that Samui was about to say something. However, she was unable to because the summoned Manda disappeared in a giant plume of smoke and they were all falling rapidly down to the ground. Naruto was trying to get out a Haraishin kunai to try and get them all to safety, but he also had a fear in doing so. He'd never used the jutsu with anyone or anything else, so he couldn't predict the outcomes of what would happen if he did. But his protective nature overrode that fear as he didn't want his friends to be hurt. Finally, grabbing one from his pouch, he looked to where he saw Killer Bee last and targeted the top of his head. He then threw it as hard as he could, and when it landed to its destination, he grabbed the two female blondes by their waists, and then flashed over to the fully transformed Hachibi container. All of them landed safely on B's head. "Phew, thanks for the save, Naruto-kun," Yujito said to him while wiping her forehead with a hand. "When they say that cats always land on their feet, it doesn't mean from this height." Samui smirked as she thought the joke was a little funny, but it soon disappeared when she heard a cough followed by a splatter of blood. She snapped her head towards the source and saw Naruto hunched over on his knees, covering his mouth with a hand as he coughed profusely. Her eyes widened as she went to his side in an instant. "Naruto-kun." Samui had always never been the type to show her emotions. It was because she didn't want uninvited, or untrusted, people getting too close to her if they found her too friendly. But she also didn't want to drive people away by being too cold either, so she settled on staying indifferent with the people she met, and her opinions of said people would go from there. It would depend entirely on them how she would act around them, and since most of them were men, both shinobi and civilian, who were only interested in trying to cop a feel of her breasts, she would end up being cold to them. But there were a few that she would, at least, actually smile and be herself around them. Her brother, Atsui, was of course one of them, since he was her only family member. Then there was Yujito, a person she grew up and trained with. Omo and Karui were her students. They had somewhat annoyed her at the beginning, but she got used to their bickering and eventually grew to like them. Killer B, she was a little iffy on him, mostly because of his terribly incessant rapping. But besides that, he wasn't a bad person to be around. Finally, there was Naruto. Many thought that it was unbelievable how he was able to get her to be so friendly with him in the short 3 months since he'd come to Kumo. Even she was amazed at it. But the blonde had wormed his way into her heart, and she gladly welcomed him in. Why would she not? He was exactly the type of man that she was interested in. Naruto was strong, loyal, interested in kenjutsu, and was very fun to be around, not to mention how handsome he was. This was a plus in her book. That and he didn't ogle her breasts every time they met up, another plus. But she couldn't help but frown right now as she thought of him. It was because she was worried for her fellow blonde. More specifically, she was worried for his life. How is he? Samui asked when she saw B finish checking on Naruto, who was tucked into a sleeping bag in order to keep him warm during the night. Killer B shook his head before he answered. He'll live, he said, for now, at least. He's in such bad shape I don't even know where to begin. First, his chakra veins have been strained, so it will be a while before he's able to use chakra again without bursting them. Then he has pretty bad internal injuries that will take a while to heal. Even with Kyubi's help, he's going to need to be treated properly once we get back to Kumo, since we don't have either the training or the equipment in order to heal him. He then looked over his shoulder to look at the blonde and then turned his head back towards Samui and Yujito. It's actually a miracle that he survived, he said. Anyone else would have already been dead by now. Thank Kami for the Kyubi then, Yujito said from her position on the ground. Between her and B was a single campfire that burned with only a decent amount of light so that no wandering otonin could spot it. But it still provided the perfect amount of illumination for the Kumo squad. It's probably what's keeping him from dying right now. Samui shook her head at this, her bangs flowing side to side as she did. No, she said in disagreement. Naruto-kun has a formidable amount of willpower. I've seen it whenever I train with him, and he's trying to learn a certain technique. He'll bring himself to exhaustion and still keep going just to learn that move. I'm sure that he'd survive this even without the Kyubi's help. A small smile formed on Yujito's lips at this and nodded. Yeah, she said fondly, it's one of his more appealing traits. B's eyes quickly looked between the two behind his sunglasses and he watched their expressions. He took a few moments of observing them before he grinned widely and pointed at the two kunoichi. I get it, he said, and they looked at him. You two like him, right? Did my students decide to share the new guy while I was away? He was immediately bopped on the head for those questions by an annoyed Yujito. Her eyebrows were twitching in annoyance before she looked at him with a deceitfully calm smile on her face. You should keep stupid questions like that to yourself, she said, and he cringed at the eerily cheerful tone that she was using. Or else you'll be using a straw to eat the rest of your meals from now on. Got it? Got it. B immediately said with scared nod. Good. Yujito patted him on the head as if he were a pet. Glad to know that you're not a complete idiot. She then went back to her spot by the fire. Samui was amused at the little interaction between the two but did not let it show on her face. However, B's question did plague her mind as she contemplated it. She knew that if she did pursue a romantic relationship with the blonde Namikaze, she would most likely have to share him with other women thanks to the Clan Restoration Act. Personally, she thought that it was simply an excuse for some men with a rare bloodline to have more than one woman and have their own personal harem. However, she had a feeling that with Naruto it would be different. She always saw Naruto treat any woman he met with kindness and respect, and he would always turn down the many propositions of some of more beautiful civilians of Kumo to have sex with them. When questioned why he refused the offers, he confessed to her that he had never gone that far with a woman yet, and that he wanted his first time to be with someone that he loved, not some pretty woman that only wanted one thing from him and nothing else. Her respect of him definitely grew after this, but her mind went back to her original line of thinking. Would she be okay with sharing Naruto with other women? She would have to think about this and see if it would matter. But not right now. Right now, they had to get Naruto to Kumo so that he could be healed, and when he was, she was going to tell him about her feelings for him. If she learned anything about this sudden invasion by Oto, it was that anything could happen without expectation. So she concluded that before anything else happened, she wanted to at least make her intentions of being with Naruto clear. XXX. During the night the trio took turns in guarding the camp while the others slept and regained their energy, alternating every couple of hours. Because B and Yujito were Jinchuriki, they did not need as much sleep. But Samui was not, and she relished in finally being able to drift off into the blissful darkness of slumber. If they were going to make it back to the village, they were going to need as much energy as they could get. The reason for that was because of the Otonin that most likely would be heading towards the epicenter of the fights they were all in earlier that day. None of them knew the numbers of their invading enemy, and they didn't think that now was a good time to find out, not when Naruto was injured and unconscious. So they all silently agreed that they would not get into any unneeded skirmishes and travel around the Otonin. All of them knew the terrain of their home by heart, so it would be easy to travel to the village unnoticed, of course. That also meant that it would take longer as well, but they didn't really have a choice in the matter. So when it was just an hour away from dawn, they packed up their camp, put out the fire and continued in heading towards home. B was the one carrying Naruto as he led his two kunoichi students through the various mountain pathways that scoured across Kumogakure. They were extremely useful in dodging a few squads of Otonin that they were able to spot that were indeed heading towards their previous battleground. It wasn't like they were going to find anything that would tell them what happened there. Only that a huge battle took place from how ravaged the landscape was because of B transforming into his full Biju form and clashing against Orochimaru's summon, Manda. It would have been a perfect chance to ambush them when they were all gathered there, but they had Naruto to worry about right now, no matter what the other villages thought of Kumo or of its ninja. They never let their comrades die if there was a way to save them. Hours passed by slowly as they repeated stopping every now and then, carefully choosing which path they would go through next. Those hours turned to days, about 2 in estimate, and they had gone undetected the whole time. Naruto had stayed unconscious throughout the time span and did not look like he was recovering at all, which made all of them confused. Kyuubi's healing should have kicked in long ago, healing at least some of his injuries. But that was not the case. Occasionally, the blonde Namikaze would cough up blood, making Samui and Yujito's worry for him increase. B wondered if it was because of Naruto using the Haraishin along with other people. He was not a medic nin, however, so his knowledge was limited and was unable to come up with an answer. The Hachibi told him to wait until they got back to the village and see what the medics said when they healed him. He nodded with a hum and went back to thinking of new rhymes for his Enka-style rapping, much to his Bija's ire and consternation. The main gate of their home was now in view, causing the two kunoichi to sigh in relief while B grinned widely and cheered loudly at finally being back. They hastened the pace they were going at in order to get Naruto to the hospital so that they could start healing his injuries. When they passed the gate they immediately took to jumping over the rooftops of the various buildings as a short cut to their destination. It was fortunate that the hospital was built very close to the main gate, so that it was close by in case someone was injured. It only took them a few minutes to reach it, quickly entering through the doors and calling for medics, telling them they had an injured teammate that needed help right away. A small group of medic nin was instantly in front of them and proceeded in taking Naruto from B, carefully placing him on a gurney before taking him to an empty healing room. One stayed behind in order to ask them all questions about how Naruto got the injuries, to which they promptly answered as it would most likely give them an advantage in dealing with them. When that was done, the medic nodded and followed after his colleagues to tell them what he had learned. Samui and Yujito both had an expression of worry for Naruto, hoping that he would be alright. B nodded towards them, silently telling them that they needed to get going to see his brother and give their mission report. They reluctantly nodded in return and followed the dark-skinned container out of the hospital. XXX. Reikage Mansion. The office building of the Reikage was the largest tower in the whole village, easily overlooking it and its populace. It had hundreds of various, but high-ranking, shinobi that worked in the many divisions they had. They would range from enemy tactics to perimeter defenses and anything else that would protect their village 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they all took their jobs seriously, as they did not want to disappoint their kage. Samui had been here many times throughout her years as one of Kumo's elite kunoichi, yet she still couldn't help but be internally amazed at how many people were running around everywhere as if the world was ending. Well, except for a few of the younger-looking shinobi males that immediately stopped when they caught eye of her, or rather, her larger-than-average bust. Their lecherous leering disgusted her to no end, but she did not let it show on her face. She would not let them make her lose her cool. Yujito, however, "Hey!" she yelled angrily, "stop staring and get back to work." This snapped them out of whatever hopeless fantasies they were having and immediately obeyed her command, blushing from embarrassment. Yujito crossed her arms on her chest and muttered to herself, "Haven't they ever seen a woman before?" The question wasn't meant to be heard but be did, and he grinned before he gave her an answer. "It's because those pests like big, bouncy breasts, yo!" he rapped, making the nibby container's brows twitch in annoyance. She then punched him on the top of his head with enough force to cause him to fall straight to the ground on his stomach. He grunted when he did and then groaned as he rubbed the spot where he was hit. "What did I tell you about being an idiot?" Yujito yelled while stomping on him a few times. The scene caused all of the room's occupants to sweat drop as they saw B get mercilessly beaten by the angry feline-like kunoichi, except for Samui, who was able to resist the urge. After a few minutes of this, Yujito was finally done and patted her hands a couple times before smirking down at a twitching killer bee. "Maybe this time you'll finally learn a lesson," she said to him. She then walked towards the stairs to get to the top floor, where the Raikage's office was located. Samui sighed as she followed her teammate, grasping the scarf that Bee wore around his neck, and dragged him along as if it were something she'd done many times before, which she had. Sometimes she wished her sensei would know not to say such perverted things in front of Yujito. Then it would save her from having even more shoulder problems. Perhaps Naruto could give her a massage once he was healed? She shook her head of those thoughts and focused on what she would say during the report. After having to walk up a few flights of stairs, they were now on the Raikage's floor. The door in front of them had the kanji for lightning written over it in black ink, just like the bigger versions of it on the outside of the building. By then, B was able to recover enough to walk on his own, so Samui didn't have to continue lugging him around like a ragdoll, which she was eternally thankful for. He was still groaning, however, from all the bumps and bruises that riddled both his body and face in a comical fashion. Samui was about to open the door but stopped her hand an inch away from the knob. She could hear yelling from the inside. The busted blonde looked to her teammates, who had curious yet confused expressions on their faces like her, and wondered what it was all about. Before she could even say anything, the door abruptly opened. An old man with grizzled hair stood in the doorway, facing towards the Raikage, his face contorted with anger. Samui recognized the man to be Yatsuki Komura, an elder member of the most prominent clan in Kumo. "You're making a mistake," Komura yelled at the heavily muscled leader. "We need to keep our weapons close to the village in case of an attack. Sending them out on some pointless mission based on loose information is both irrational and stupid." The Raikage, who was standing up behind his desk, slammed his fists down onto his desk, making the wood creak as it was near to being broken. "Shut your mouth," he yelled to the elder. "What I order my ninja to do is none of the business of either you or your clan. Now get out of my sight before I have you hauled away by ANBU." The old Yatsuki clan member scoffed in clear disapproval before he turned around and met the eyes of Samui, B, and Yujito. "Out of my way," he said as he pushed himself past them in a rude manner. "I have no desire to speak to any of you." Komura soon disappeared down the stairs to wherever his destination was. Yujito narrowed her eyes as she saw him go. She had never liked that old man. Every time she had the displeasure of talking to him, he always referred to her as weapon or something similar to that. He had never called her by her name, ever. That's what really infuriated her. Yatsuki Komura was of the old generation of shinobi, believing that jinchuriki like her were nothing more than tools for the village. In her eyes, Kumogakure would be a lot better off if he were to go ahead and kick the bucket. She was cut out of her musing when she felt a hand on her shoulder. The nibby container turned her head to see that it was Samui. The busted kunoichi used her head to gesture for them to go in the office. "Come on," she said, "you can think of ways to kill him without being caught later. We still have to give the mission report to Raikage-sama." "Right," Yujito replied with a nod. The blonde trio then walked into the office, where he was just barely calming himself down thanks to a few words from Mabui. It had been a while since she had to see the Raikage get so mad that it took his assistant to calm him down. They stood waiting for a few moments while he proceeded to compose himself by taking deep, slow breaths. It seemed to do the trick, as he became more relaxed and sat back into his chair with a sigh. His eyes then looked up and he grinned upon seeing his brother, Samui, and Yujito. He frowned right after though, as he noticed the absence of Naruto and wondered where the whiskered blonde was. "You're back," I said to them. "Good, things have gotten hectic since you left, but that matter can wait. Now, where is Naruto?" "He's supposed to be here since he was a part of your squad in the mission. He was badly injured after he fought with Orochimaru," Samui answered him, trying to keep her tone even and not worrisome. "He used the Haraishin to save Yujito and I from falling to death, and it caused him to suffer massive internal damage. We got him to the hospital as soon as we made it into the village." A's eyes widened at hearing the information, while Mabui gasped with a hand over her mouth. He knew that Naruto was still working on completing the Haraishin, but that was only being used alone. He'd yet to start training to use the technique with other people. "Do you know how long he'll be there?" he asked. Yujito shook her head at this. The doctors said that they would need to see the extent of this damage before they gave any estimates, she responded. "But from the looks of him, he's going to be down for a while." Her cadence grew more concerned at the end of her sentence. The heavily muscled Kage sighed while shaking his head. "He's going to get himself killed if he keeps being reckless like that," he said to them. "I'll have to wait for his report then. But seeing as you three are fine, I'll need you to tell me what happened during your mission. Were you able to succeed?" Samui, Yujito, and B took turns in telling him what happened during their assignment. They started from the beginning where they arrived at Orochimaru's camp, where they quickly devised a way to get rid of most of its occupants via Naruto's Haraishin Jutsu. It was after this that they divided themselves to taking on their respective opponents, Naruto against Sasuke, Samui and Yujito against Kabuto, and Killer Bee against Orochimaru. They explained what happened during their fights and what they could have what happened in Naruto's. All they could tell about that fight was that Naruto was able to kill the Uchiha. Then they explained how Kabuto was able to escape from the two Kumo Kunoichi and rescued his master right before B was about to finish him. They were able to catch up to them near the border to Shimagakure, however, and continued their battle there. This time, though, Samui and Yujito were able to outsmart the silver-haired medic Nin, and were able to trap him inside one of Yujito's jutsu, a cage made of azure blue fire. This was when Naruto had regrouped with them and sealed Kabuto inside a containment scroll for easy transport. And now that Kabuto was out of the way, they set their sights on helping B with Orochimaru. Orochimaru had summoned the mighty Manda to battle against the transformed Killer Bee in his Hachibi form. He kept the snake summon busy while Naruto and the others faced off against the Sannin atop Manda's head. The fight was not an easy one, since their opponent was one of the legendary Sannin, and also a former candidate to be Konoha's Yondaime Hokage. But it was thanks to the Haraishin that Naruto was able to trick Orochimaru at the last second and stab him from behind with his sword. It was after this happened that something bizarre occurred. Orochimaru was slowly absorbed into his sword. Samui told how they were all confused as to what happened but was not able to truly ponder it because Manda suddenly disappeared because his master was gone. This was when Naruto used his Haraishin to save his two Kunoichi friends from falling to death, setting them down safely atop the ox head of B's transformed state before he fell to his knees and coughed up blood. The Raikage didn't need the details as to how they got back since he got the main information already. Truly, it was a successful mission. Not only were they able to capture Kabuto, but they were able to put down Orochimaru. At least that's what he hoped had happened to the damned snake. "You've all done well," they said proudly. "I'll start getting Kabuto interrogated right away and see if we can't get any secrets out of him about Orochimaru. That may be a while since he was trained by that snake, however, so you're all on leave until I need you for another mission. Maybe it'll give Naruto enough time to heal as well." Samui couldn't help but be confused before she asked, "But what about the rest of the Otonin? Even if we took out Orochimaru, they should still be able to operate by themselves, and we still don't know how many of them are in the country." The dark-skinned Kage placated his subordinate with a wave of his hand. "I've sent multiple squads out to travel along the borders and take out any Otonin they come across. Darui, Omoi, and Kari are among them, so any they do encounter won't stand that much of a chance. You've done your part for the village, now let them do theirs. Do you have any other questions?" "No? Then you are dismissed." Samui and Yujito saluted to their leader, preparing to leave the room. They stopped, however, when they saw that B was not going along with them. "You're not coming with us, B-sensei?" Yujito asked him with an eyebrow raised from curiosity. He shook his head, grinning at them before he used a hand to give them a thumbs-up gesture. "I just need to talk to my bro, yo," B rapped in reply, Go ahead and see Naruto and I'll meet up with you later. FO show. The two kunoichi looked at each other, shrugged, and then exited the office to go see the blonde Namikaze like B suggested. When they were out of sight, B's face slowly went from a grin to a solemn, serious expression as he turned towards his brother. A saw this and his face mirrored that of the Hachibi container. Mabui, A said without turning his head, you can leave for the day, make sure you're here at the same time tomorrow. Mabui was both confused and concerned at this since the Reikage had rarely let her leave early. Normally, she would have refused, but from the seriousness in her leader's voice she could tell that it was not up for debate. She didn't say anything as she gathered the papers that A had finished up in her arms and exited the office. The large-statured Kage made a seal with one hand after the door was fully closed, activating the privacy seal that had been placed in the office long ago, when the Namikaze were still alive in the village. It was incredibly useful for when he didn't want conversations like the one he was about to have to be heard. What is it, B? A asked. Bro, B said while crossing his arms over his chest, I think we've got a problem. XXX. Naruto opened his eyes with a small groan. His cerulean blue eyes immediately saw a bright, blue sky above him, with clouds drifting along listlessly. He quickly sat up and felt a sudden, sharp pain in his head which caused him to grasp it with both of his hands. The blonde stayed like this for a few moments, until the pain passed away. He exhaled slowly when it did before he looked up to take in his surroundings. Instantly, he knew where he was. In his mind, again, he was mentally complaining that he was coming here way too much for his liking, despite the fact that he trained in his mindscape with the Kyuubi every night he went to sleep. Naruto placed his hands on the soft grass that he was just lying in, feeling sort of relaxed at how peaceful it was in his mind. But he knew that he had other things to do right now, so he stood up, brushing off any grass from his hands and pants. His eyes then searched the expansive grasslands in his mind that seemed to be endless. Soon he saw the copy of his clan's mansion that he put in his mindscape in order to store any knowledge that he learned for just-in-case purposes. In the front of it stood a large oak tree that easily rivaled the height of the mansion, and with a thickness of several feet, it offered a generous amount of shade that was perfect for the Kyuubi to sit beneath and rest. At least, in her fox form it would. His mind was still getting used to the idea that the Kyuubi was not only able to change into a human, but was also a female. He was going to definitely ask her about that when he saw her. It didn't take him that long to cross the distance between him and the mansion, which was approximately 25 yards. As he got closer, he could hear a soft humming noise coming from near the tree. He soon saw that it was coming from the Kyuubi herself, sitting up at the bark of the tree with her back against it. Her eyes were closed, with a small peaceful smile was formed on her lips as she seemed to be in her own little world. The blonde Namikaze couldn't help but think how beautiful she looked like this. He shook his head to make the blush that was beginning to form go away. He walked over to her, seeing one of her ears flicker before she opened her eyes to reveal her crimson orbs. Kyuubi turned her head upwards and met the eyes of her container. Naruto stood only a couple of feet away from her, not breaking eye contact with his bijou as he sat down in front of her. Silence was the only thing heard as they stayed like this. A slow, cool breeze blew on the tree branches above them, causing the leaves on them to shake, with some of them coming loose and falling down below. A few landed besides Naruto while some others fell into the Kyuubi's lap. But she did nothing about them. It was her who finally broke the silence that enveloped them, as she was quickly growing annoyed at the impromptu staring contest they were having. You really need to stop being so impulsive, Naruto, she said to him, catching him off guard. What do you mean by that? He asked. You know what I'm talking about, she replied sternly. Using the Harassment with two others was a very dangerous move, Naruto. Your body is not used to having to use the jutsu with others yet, so you are suffering very bad injuries because of that, and it will be a while before you're completely recovered and back at 100%. Naruto slightly frowned upon hearing this, not liking it one bit. How long until I'm healed? He asked, hoping that it wasn't going to be very long. She merely shrugged her shoulders before she answered him. I'd say about 3 weeks, Kyuubi said, but that's just an approximation so I can't really be sure. The blonde opened his mouth slightly ajar. 3 weeks? He said, shocked at the amount of time. Even with your healing abilities it'll take that long? What did you expect, Naruto? Kyuubi chastised. When you use the Harassment, you're manipulating space and time to allow you to jump from place to place in the blink of an eye. It's an astounding technique, but the consequences are great if it ever backlashes. If you were not a Jinchuriki, you would either be dead or in a permanent coma. Compared to those, 3 weeks is a blessing. Naruto completely agreed with her. He would take being in a hospital for 3 weeks than death or being in permanent comatose every time. You're right about that, he said, and I get your point. I'll be more careful with using the Haration from now on. No more doing things without thinking. The vixen nodded in approval at this as she crossed her arms under her breasts. Naruto did his best not to look good, she said matter-of-factly. I'm getting a little tired of always having to save your ass every time you get severely injured. She smirked when she saw the whiskered ninja grow a tick mark on his forehead. Very funny, Naruto replied flatly.